Tonight's meeting, an executive session was held to discuss confidential and legal matters. The board does welcome and invites public comment. You may address the board on agenda and non-agenda items. The first opportunity for comments at the beginning of the meeting is limited to agenda items only. If you do choose to address the board, there's cards up on the podium back here. Please fill them out and hand it into Deputy Superintendent Ramos, whose hand is now raised at the table on the floor. Comment cards, I already mentioned that. Once recognized, come to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and kindly limit your remarks for 3 minutes. We do have 3 items on our Finance Committee of the Whole meeting. We have, and all 3 of these items surround the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget. We have a presentation from PFM. As we have been over recent years since 2017, we've been doing 5-year projections, which are really critical so that we can make good decisions this year and today and understand their impact on outlying years. We have the final budget, item number 2 on the agenda, which we'll see a presentation and then we'll be voting and discussing on that. And then the third item is the Homestead Farmstead exclusion resolution. So the 2 items, item number 2 and item number 3 are action items that need to be voted upon. And item number 1 is a presentation that does not need to be voted upon. And I would like to just take a moment to, with my colleagues, and I just feel rightly so as chair of the Finance Committee, passing a budget is one of the largest things we can do in terms of the authority that's given us and entrusted in us from the community in the state of Pennsylvania, and also from, among us as colleagues, and also for the staff, for the students, and the city of Allentown. So, this is an important thing that we do as a body. One of the things that we, should hold dear and take the time to understand and deliberate as thoroughly as possible, making these decisions on behalf of the public. So I thank every one of my colleagues here for putting in the time as they do. And we'll get started here with Dr. Stanford. Any particular comments that you have tonight?
Mr. Chairman, I do not. I think you have already stated what I was going to say. And so in the interest of time, I will pass. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Stanford. Mr. Board Secretary, do we have any public comments on agenda items?
Yeah, 2. Sarah Jane Brace.
Please come to the podium and state your name, address.
Sarah Brace, 227 North 9th Street, Allentown. Good evening, Board of Directors. A few years ago, when I sat in those seats, all I heard from the public was to pass a fair contract for our paraprofessionals so they could earn a living wage, and the board did that. Last year, all I heard from the public on social media and in meetings was to pass a fair contract for the teachers because they deserve fair pay after everything they did through the pandemic, and the board did that. Last week, the board passed a contract with the secretaries that included wage increases as well. Well, now it's time to pay for all those increases to our staff salaries, and the community that called for them needs to be okay with you as a board raising taxes to pay for our staff. When you invest in your staff, you invest in your children. So thank you for investing in your staff so your children now have people in the buildings who will help them be successful. What's really interesting this year is that you have the opportunity to raise taxes to the maximum amount and help fund our district. Yet the average homeowner will end up with a decrease in their tax bill because of the Homestead Farmstead amounts. Taxpayers win and the district wins. By raising taxes, you're saying you will continue to support programming for our kids, and homeowners will still end up saving money. If you don't vote to raise taxes, you're going to have to cut programming or staff, and this directly impacts the education of our students. And every motion not to raise taxes should include what you will cut to balance the budget so the public knows where you stand with the education of our kids. Will you cut all-day kindergarten since that's not mandated? Will you cut specials back to less than once every 8 days? Will you cut after-school clubs in the high schools? Will you cut school counselors so they have an increased workload, which is already higher than industry standards? Will you outsource our entire special ed department? Will you? And the list goes on and on. Every single one of these things would be detrimental to the outcomes of our children who are already at a disadvantage because of where they live and the lack of state funding to support their education. So are you going to be a board that educates our kids while saving homeowners money? Or will you be a board that saves homeowners money while slashing our kids' education? I hope you will go the route of raising taxes to keep programming and staff in our buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Brace.
Sharon Billington.
Please state your name, address.
Sharon
Thank you.
Billington, Chew Street, Allentown. And I live in town of Allentown, not on the west end where, people might assume. So I do agree with Sarah Brace about the tax situation. We are still making up for what was done 10, 12, 15 years ago, where taxes were not raised because it was politically to the advantage of members of the board. The taxes have to be raised. That's a fact of life. There is no getting around that. With the Homestead Act, as Mrs. Brace just said, there will be no increase to homeowners. This is a necessary evil for a public, free, accessible, quality, equitable education that we offer. This is a necessary step that has to be done. My concern is too, that if we do not do this, we will be cutting programs. We will be cutting teachers. We are having enough trouble filling the teachers' positions as it is. If they know that there's cuts on the horizons, we're not going to fill those positions. So that's number one. I agree with that. Number two, I had a question regarding, or a comment regarding what Ms. Ortiz mentioned in last week's meeting about the director of virtual learning. That position, I do not understand the necessity of $105,000. If we're cutting, that should be where it should go. We are outsourcing our virtual learning. They are providing PA standards aligned curriculum, including core and advanced placement courses, PA certified teachers of record, electives, world languages, career and technical education, and social emotional learning. Services also include on-demand tutoring in English and math and Spanish and French 7 days a week, special education coordinator support with review of IEP and 504 programs. There are phone calls already going out from principals of different schools saying, have you enrolled your child in virtual learning? I do not see the need for the director of virtual learning. There is where we can save some money. So please take a look at some of these administrative roles when we need desperately more teachers in the classroom, direct contact with our students. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Billington.
Robert Smith.
Even Mr. Smith, your name and address, please. Thank you.
I'm Robert E. Smith Jr. I live on 1060 East Gordon Street. That's on the east side of Allentown. But tonight I'm also president of the East Side Rittersville Association, so I'm representing them. So I told them I'll be good, so I'll be polite. Good to see you all again. I agree with some of the speakers said, but also as an East Sider and a hard worker, as many seniors know me on the East Side, and I spoke last year about the 89 who's now 90 and the 92-year-old who's now 93. And I'll probably be talking about these people hopefully till they get to 100, that they're holding on to their house by a thread. Now I know I've been on that board for 16 years and I was on the board when we did 0 increases, but I also was on the board when we lowered 5 and 6 and 8% increases to 2 or 1.5. My disagreement is not with a tax increase because we have new schools and I understand incrementally going up, we need to for the expenses, but there's no reason to jump 5.3%. And that's what I'm urging. And that's what my organization is urging. There's 15 administrative positions being put. I've heard about the unions. But what about these administrations? Why don't we look at them one at a time? Why are they all voted on together? I have some problems with all of these positions in 1 year, all at once. You could have gradually put them in the budget and not hit the school district so hard. So I think in this committee meeting, we can talk about this and try and maybe cut a little bit here and cut a little bit there and maybe get the budget down to 2-3%. And I think that would be fair. And I would be okay with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. That is all. Okay. The first agenda item is the PFM 5-year projection. Mr. Ristakezian.
Thank you, Mr. Thiel. So tonight we're bringing forward PFM update of the 5-year projections. We wanted to get different scenarios out there in terms of what we did in the proposed budget, some of the rumblings we're hearing in terms of anticipated revenue coming in from the state, as well as some of the changes we've done with our contracts, labor agreements and open expired, as we sort of ratify the open and expired contracts. So with all those changes, we thought it's a good time and an opportunity to really revisit the projections, see what they look like, see if we're heading in the right direction and go through the different scenarios of our budget. So we have on the line, Ian Tyson and Dean Kaplan from PFM. I believe you guys are all familiar with them. I'd like to reintroduce them to you and pass it along to Dean.
Great. Thank you, Harry.
Hello.
I think,
one quick question for you, just kind of procedurally for my colleagues and I. Would you prefer us hold questions to the end, or is it okay if you're on a slide, if one of my colleagues has a question, they ask that question in the context of the slide itself?
I think that would be great. If it's something that'll get picked up later, we'll mention it, but otherwise, yeah, we'd be happy to answer as we go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and good evening. Thanks for having us all here. As Harry mentioned, I'm Dean Kaplan from PFM. I'm joined by my colleague, Ian Tyson, who you met before, and also tonight by Soraya Louisant, who is a new member of our team who worked on the analysis that we're sharing tonight and will be part of our team going forward. You'll all recall that, Ian, if you want to flip up one slide here, you'll recall that in late January, we presented financial projections, as the chairman noted and Harry noted, in the multi-year financial plan. And we were really presenting a baseline financial projection to help evaluate the impact of the district's recent progress with improvements in operations and financial management, and showing how that affected your finances and have improved them over the last several years. We also presented several scenarios with initiatives to close the projected budget gap in the out years, which is something you've consistently done over the last several years, and to provide a pathway for the district to achieve financial stability while still investing in key priorities that some of the recent speakers mentioned. So what we've done tonight is put together an updated baseline projection to be used in making decisions during the adoption and now implementation of the 22-23 budget, recognizing that there are, of course, several open items, and as several people have mentioned, most significantly the state budget aid for 22-23. So we've, in this updated analysis, we've incorporated the district's most recent audited financial results, the 2021 results, the proposed budget, with the caveat that this was prior to any of the adjustments you made last week, and we'll note that a couple times. And we've also we'll review that projection this evening and highlight the areas that the district should focus on in planning for this year and future years, given, as always, there's some items that are fluid. I want to skip up two slides there. To reset with all of you here who saw the presentation in January, you've seen this slide before. It's updated for the 22-23 budget. Overall, we're talking about a $400 million budget. So most of the revenue, of course, is from the state. You can see the proportion there, with the rest from local services. And on the spending side, employee salaries and benefits are almost 65%, and the charter school tuition is the second largest category at over 16%. So roughly 80%, or 4/5 of the budget, is going to salaries, benefits, and charter school tuition. So it's the large fixed items on both sides of your budget are kind of good to keep in mind as we go through this. I'd also note that this year's budget, of course, includes the use of almost $10 million in ESSER funds for continuity of operations. So the budget projection, as it was in January, is significantly affected by the influx of one-time federal funding and then its eventual departure in a couple of years. Just to kind of hit a couple of the key assumptions we made in doing this. Obviously, the largest source of local income are real estate taxes, and based on the modest but continued growth in the sorry, I'm losing my screen here, in the assessed value in Allentown, we have a 0.2% increase after this year, and obviously that's going to be very much subject to what happens with development, particularly outside the NIS, some of the uncertain economic conditions, with some projections of recession and some people more dubious about that. We'll see that there. The one factor to recall is that even you need quite a significant increase in assessed value to significantly affect revenue received by the district. So even tens of millions of dollars which don't normally happen in a given year, would have a modest increase on that going forward. The collection rate, we assume the historical collection rate at about 94%, which is the recent 5-year average. And for this kind of baseline projection, we have not included any tax increases after the 5.3% increase that's in the proposed 22-23 budget. We also, we'll talk a little bit more about the impact of that and what that means and what it would mean if you did something different going forward. We wanted to start with a no tax increase in the out years, so you could get a sense of what levers you have to pull. And then finally, the earned income tax rate has historically grown at a rate of over 2.5% per year. It's one of your more, it's not a huge revenue source, but it's notable and it grows at a good rate. So that's the local sources. At the state level, there are, of course, two major funds. You receive transportation, you receive help from on making Social Security and retirement payments for employees, but the biggest sources of revenue are the basic education funding and special education funding. As noted earlier, this is the biggest wild card in the budget. The state has not passed its budget yet. There are new rumors every day about that. But the governor asked for a really large increase, and we haven't. We've been seeing comments from some of the state associations, including the ones that you're active in, the business administrators, the school boards association, suggesting that the likely increase will be much smaller than what the governor requested. And of course, there's a move among some of the legislature to significantly reduce what the governor asked for. So with that up in the air. At this point, we use the district's assumptions in the budget. So for this year, for this coming year, which are 10% over the current year for the basic education funding and 5% over this year for special education funding. And those are pretty close to the kind of historical assumptions. They're a little bit more generous, especially in basic education funding, where the historical rate we use in the out years is a little over 4%. And for special ed, just under 4%. But we've seen that in the last couple of years. There have been some cases where the governor's asked for it and received a little bit more than the trend number. So it's extremely frustrating that we don't have this number yet. And estimates vary widely, but again, we'll show you an assumption of a somewhat more generous state aid budget, and you can see what that looks like. The next area for revenues to take a look at are federal revenues, and of course, this is heavily affected by ESSER funding. What we've done for purposes of modeling is assume that all of the one-time ESSER funds in the budget are in fact included for 22-23, but they're not extended in the following years. So the district will obviously have some ESSER funds remaining after this year. How you choose to use those, whether to support operations, to support one-time programs for capital and other items, is obviously still a matter for discussion in the long term. So for now, that's obviously a lever that can be helpful in the short term, but we have not included it beyond the 22-23 budget year. So on the other hand, we have assumed, because of the choices you made to spend the money so far, that the expenditures in the budget that are being covered by ESSER in 22-23 are recurring and will remain in the out years. So again, should you decline to retain some of the ESSER funded programs, that would be an area to reduce spending in the out years. But for now, we're assuming those were programs that you specifically identified that you wanted and were interested in maintaining. Similarly, the 21st Century grant from the state, which is reduced over the next couple of years as it phases out by 24-25. We left the expenditures there, assuming that you're going to want to continue to provide those supports. The next area of major consideration is just salary assumptions. And what we've done is we've included all of the contracts that have recently been agreed to, which obviously have significant growth, especially for clerical staff and paraprofessionals. We've included through the current term. So obviously the clerical staff runs through almost our entire projection, 26-27, and the paraprofessionals have another 2 years. And then for the teachers, when their contract expires at the end of next year, and the other unions, when their bargaining units, when their contracts expire, we assume an inflationary rate of 2.55%. And this is something for this number, obviously given the current spike in inflation, it's something we're watching pretty closely. We tend to use the Federal Reserve Bank's kind of long-term inflation rate, which is a little bit lower than the headlines you're seeing today. But that is something we've raised it about 0.5%, probably I think probably a significant amount since the January projection. We'll continue to watch that, because really what we're talking about here is long-term inflation through a 5-year projection. So it will be affected a little bit by current amounts, but we're assuming that for now that the short-term inflation rate the long-term inflation rate will be a little bit lower. And then, significantly in our salary assumptions, we are projecting that there aren't changes in headcount, and that all budgeted vacancies that were in the original published 22-23 budget are filled. So as we'll discuss later, that's another area of leverage. Clearly, you put the positions in the budget because you want those employees to be on the job and be supporting kids every day. As you make budget choices in the out years, you'll have some ability to address that number. For now, we're assuming that they're all funded. A couple other highlights on the expenditure side. We put in healthcare growth based on your historical trends, similar to what it's been in the past, at about 5.5%. For charter school tuition, which is a major driver in your budget, as I mentioned at the outset, we've assumed enrollment increases based on our review of the historical results and trends, and also the current and new enrollment caps for the brick and mortar charter schools. With those assumptions, we add about 350 students during the projection period. And then obviously, as there are more students and as the district's budget goes up, it tends to drive the charter school spending. That's what goes into the formula. And so we adjust that each year. We also include debt service payments for a $75 million borrowing for the new middle school. So that's included here as well. We know that's something that's particularly important to the board. So when you roll this all together, you'll get the chart in the table below, which show the preliminary baseline using the assumptions described in the previous slides. And you'll see that those of you who can remember back to January, it's a little bit better than it was then, given some of the changes you've made and the additional the assumptions about the state aid budget and some of the other. Yes.
Before we continue, I just wanted to kind of give an opportunity for my colleagues.
Okay.
All the previous 8 slides, just want to make sure that if anybody had any specific questions on all the inputs and assumptions that are going into this 5-year projection that Dean is going to go over here in great detail that he just covered before. I just wanted to give an opportunity for any questions. Anyone? Okay, cool. Thank you, Dean.
That was thank you. So in looking at this table, seeing is in the yellow bars is the annual result, and the blue is the cumulative result over the years. And you can see you start out with this year's budget at a break-even point and a $14.5 million fund balance, and then each year the annual results are negative going forward, and it adds to a cumulative deficit over time. And as I've described, in our previous meetings, this isn't unusual. Obviously, almost every school district is going to have expenditures that grow at a more rapid rate than revenues over time, and has to continuously take actions to fill a gap. So the existence of a gap in and of itself is not a cause for alarm, but it does require focus of the board over time to, as you have in the past several rounds, to continually fill that gap, whether that's by spreading out new programs, by raising taxes, by getting additional aid from the state or other sources. And I would note that in just looking at these numbers, that they don't include, as I mentioned last week's budget changes, especially with the special office, central office staffing, but they do include those annual salary increases and full position funding. So those are significant inputs. So really what you're seeing here is the impact of ongoing salary increases, borrowing for the middle school, the end of ESSER funding, which is what causes, you can kind of see a little revenue drop in 23-24, growth in charter enrollment, which I described, And that's all offset by trend increases in state aid, and in this initial view, without any further local tax increases after next year, next year, 22-23. So that $25 million shortfall, which appears in 23-24, then grows by about about $10 million, and then $5 to $6 million in the out years. And what's driving that revenue is only going up about $10 million a year, while expenditures are increasing around 15 million. And again, that's, as I described, kind of the traditional structural gap that you're going to see that you can make as you make changes now. It will affect that outcome. So Ian's going to go into a little bit more detail on this chart and a little bit on these trends, show the impact of some alternatives, and then address some return to our January and subsequent ideas about addressing the shortfall in the long run, and again jump in with questions whenever you feel you'd like to.
I have one question. So you noted that these projections do not include the changes to central office staffing related contracted services. So, and I don't know, Dean, if you have that information, or Ian or Mr. Aristakezian, but the cost on that's not reflected in here year over year?
Because they were finalized on Friday.
Right, understood.
We did not have those numbers available.
That's why I'm asking the question. I just want to see how that changes that projection, over the outlying years, the next 5 years.
Well, without taking into account any compounding, Mr. Thiel, we're looking at approximately, hold on one second, it's in the other presentation. $1.855 million. So what you see on there is a $394 million budget. What we have with the updated numbers is closer to 395.5. So you're looking at about 1.855 million in addition to what's up there.
So if I were to take the 1.8 and people who live in these numbers all the time in this world, Dean and Ian and Mr. Aristakezian here, if I were to take that number and extrapolate it out to 27, 28, then that expenditure what would you estimate that expenditure would go up from 480 to what?
Yeah, I think you probably you would have that 1.85 million dollar inflated, so about 180. It's 480.8, so it's probably 483, a little bit more than that, maybe.
Yeah, that would have been my guess. Probably about $3 million, maybe 3.5 if the charter school tuition impact is a little bit greater, but somewhere around 3.
So would it be an estimate to say, I mean, using a conservative estimate, we're talking 2 million a year on all these outlying years. So that's one, and this budget we're talking about. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, we'd be looking at, a cumulative of 12 million going on to the unassigned fund balance. Am I correct in that? They adding 186. 12,
that's about
12.
right. Yeah, possibly as Ian suggested, because it drives some other things like charter tuition, it might be a little bit more, but that's a good rule of thumb. Makes it kind of easy, and you're in the right range.
Okay, so that would go from 186 to 198. Then we're talking, right? Thereabouts.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Seeing if you want to take, Ian, if you'd like to take over here.
Yeah, so a couple of things that I'll just point out with the increase in the deficit for 2023-24. Dean covered the majority of the changes there, but just wanted to reiterate that the reason why the gap opens up is, one, on the revenue side, we're taking out those ESSER funds starting in 2023-24. And then on the expenditure side, it's mostly driven by the salary and benefit assumptions, just because those salaries and benefits are the largest portions of your expenditure budget. And then for the charter school tuition, because there's an increase in the expenditure budget between this current year, 21-22, and 22-23, that gets rolled into the following year's budget. So this increase that we're seeing here, the $400 million budget or thereabout for the coming year, gets rolled into your tuition rates for 2023-24. So that's also driving some of that increase there. So sticking with the theme of the ESSER funds, the district received a little over $140 million in ESSER funds through the 3 rounds of pandemic relief from the federal government. So here, when I reference that, I'm referring to the ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ARP ESSER allocations. There were also some other grants that went out to Allentown and other school districts, but here I'm just focusing on the big three. So that was an historic investment in public education for the federal government. However, as you all know, these are one-time funds, so they are substantial, a little bit under a half of your proposed budget for next year, but they will be going away over time. There's time limitations for those grants. ESSER 1 you've already spent down, but that deadline is coming up in a couple of months in September. ESSER 2 will be spent down and within the grant timeline for 2023. And then the ARP ESSER allocation, the largest one, needs to be spent down by September of 2024. So there is a time limit on these, and there's no guarantee that they would be replaced by recurring revenues from either the federal government or the state government. In addition to the total amount and the time limitations, I just also want to draw attention to that you've also been spending down some of these over time. So ESSER 1 was spent in the last year for addressing some of the immediate impacts of the pandemic on the district's budget. ESSER 2 you've used in the current year to support the operations of the school district. And then there's a portion of those funds being used in the 22-23 proposed budget. They'll also be used to support the programs, as Dean mentioned. Aside from that, the ARP ESSER allocation also has a 20% set-aside requirement. So these must be spent on programs, evidence-based programs, to address the learning loss with the district students. So there's a little bit less flexibility in using those to support the general operations of the school district. So for our purposes, we're assuming that about $35.5 million has been spent by the end of the budget for next year, which leaves a little bit over $100 million that could be used by September of 2024. The district has already made commitments for some of those funds for projects in the district's building, for HVAC and ventilation, upgrades to curriculum and program materials, and then other priorities. So even though we're not factoring those in there to the projections now, as those plans get firmed up, and I believe that some of those have been changing recently for some of those building projects, we want to come back and in future updates include those in the projections so you can see how they affect your budget in future years. So for now, this is just the continuity of operations amount in the 2022-3 budget, and then taken out in future years. So between the use of those funds for your current uses, there probably will also be some left over for either future continuity of operations, like be used to cover the 21-22 and 22-23 school year budgets, and then possibly into next year. So I just wanted to draw attention that we're not using those in the projections now, but once those plans get firmed up, we will come back and in future updates show you those and how they affect your budget. The other major factor that Dean highlighted is the uncertainty that the state budget plays into Allentown and school districts across the state. So with the governor's proposal, this was a substantial increase in funds for all school districts. And in Allentown's proposed budget for next year, like Dean said, these are pretty reasonable assumptions. They're about in the range of what you saw in the current 21-22 school year. So one of the factors that we just wanted to highlight here is what happens if you got a little bit higher of an increase. Not as much as what the governor is proposing, but something above what's in your proposed budget. So this is about a 50% increase above what you could consider in your proposed budget for 2022-3. So this would be $300 million going through the formula, $150 million going to the Level Up initiative, where Allentown and 100 other school districts received an increment to basic education funding in the current school year. So we're assuming that you're getting more funds through the formula for BEF, additional Level Up funds, and then a greater than historical increase for special education funding. So these would still be below the governor's proposal, but still in the range of this would be the greatest increase in state funding in Governor Wolf's term. So for this budget scenario, this shows the impact of adding those funds to the baseline projections with no other changes. So essentially, this is adding $9 million of additional state funding in 2022-3, and then carrying that forward for each of the 5 years after the coming year. So the final year cumulative deficit was cut by about $45 million in 2027-28, and that $9 million is more or less constant throughout the 5 years there. So it addresses some of the gap, some of the projected gap in the out years, but does not completely close the entirety of the projected deficits. on its own. And I guess here I could stop if there are any questions about those assumptions, or I could continue on.
No questions at this time. Thank you.
So the other major lever on the district's revenue budget is tax increases. So here we're just going with the extreme end of continuing increases to the Act 1 index each year for the next 5 years. So this is not a recommendation that you should go to the Act 1 index each year. It's just to highlight what that impact has on your revenue budget. One of the things that's affecting Allentown and other school districts is that due to increases in wages and other factors that get calculated into the Act 1 index, the Independent Fiscal Office is projecting increases in that base rate. So for Allentown and other school districts that have a higher adjusted Act 1 index, that means that for the foreseeable future, for the next several years, the Act 1 index is probably going to be above 5 or 6% for the near term. So here we're just taking that Act 1 base index from the IFO and then adding in your state aid ratio to arrive at your adjusted index for the next several years. So that's where we're getting those assumptions for those increases in the middle column. Then on the right, we're applying those to your tax rate and then showing the financial impact there on a cumulative basis. So the first year increase in 2023-24, it's a little over $7 million with our assessed value assumptions and then the tax rate assumptions there on the left. And then each year that adds about an additional $7 million. So by the end in 2027-28, that's a cumulative impact of $37.2 million for the real estate tax increases. So adding those increases into the annual projections, here you can see that the deficits start to shrink over time. So we start off with an $8 million deficit that grows to 12 million, mostly due to the impact of the borrowing for the middle school that's split up between those 2 years, 2023-4 and 2024-5. And then as that borrowing stops, and then the remaining assumptions get rolled through the budget, the increases in the state aid, the expenditure assumptions that we outlined earlier, that starts to narrow over time. So those increases to the Act 1 index, they're growing faster now than your growth in your overall expenditure budget. So we see that gap narrowing over the 5 years. However, it doesn't completely close that gap. We'd have to go out another year before the tax increase would completely close that projected gap. And then I just wanted to just make a minor note that we cover in the assumptions there. So we add in that $37 million of additional revenue from the real estate tax, but that's slightly offset by the district's transfer to the library, the Allentown Library. So that's why if you add the 37 million, it doesn't quite tie out to the final year projected deficit there. So what does this all mean for the Allentown School District? So again, going back to some of Dean's comments earlier, we're assuming that that the district continues to see wage growth in future years, that all those filled positions are included in your budget. However, we do have some cautious optimism for you for the next couple of years for a couple of reasons. One is that you have a modest unassigned fund balance of less than 4% of revenues for the proposed budget in the coming year. So that's below what PDE's maximum amount is for a district the size of Allentown. So essentially, in your mind, if you doubled your fund balance on July 1st, you'd still be within PDE's range. Your maximum range for the fund balance would be somewhere around $30 million or so, just given the size of your budget. Some of the ESSER funds you will have available for continuity of operations in 2023-4 after you account for that planned spending. So that's another lever that you have to cover some of those short-term gaps in the projections. And then again, going back to the vacancies, depending on how your ability to fill those vacancies over time, due to recruiting for staff or just choices for which programs to fund and when, that is another lever that you have on the expenditure side to close some of that gap on for that part of the budget. So between those three, between the fund balance, the availability of ESSER funds, and then the ability to change that vacancy number either up or down over time, we think that you do have some flexibility in there to account for potential short-term challenges that you might face. Whether that's inflation carrying through for the remainder of the calendar year or even into next year, or like Dean said, the uncertainty of a recession, there is some flexibility there in your budget to handle those uncertainties. So really our recommendation for you in coming through the adoption of the 2022-3 school year budget and then going into implementation and planning for the long term is that we think that, focusing on your strategic goals and setting those short-term achievable goals will be important to making sure that you can meet all your programmatic investments in your students while also maintaining long-term financial stability. The key things here that we just want to come back to are, so for the ESSER funds, since those are one-time funds, programs that are supported by the ESSER funds should have some recurring funding streams coming in to support them in the long run. That could either come from either savings that are outlined in the financial plan, future tax increases, or dedication of future increases in state aid or other sources. And then again, going back to those ESSER funds, in addition to just using them for the continuity of operations, as you've been thinking through the use of those funds, and I know that has been in some of the conversations that we've had with the district's administration, is that, to the extent that they can be transformative and impact some of those underlying trends in the budget, that will change those financial projections. So to the extent that, the investments in district programs either change the trend line for charter school enrollment, or, students might be enrolled in non-public schools or other programs, that will come back and impact other aspects of your budget. So, thinking through not just the use of those funds for the continuity of education, but also how does that make sure that that impacts the students of Allentown, not just for the years while you have those funds available, but also future years. So lastly, as you come into planning for next year and future years, again, I just wanted to highlight that we're not recommending that you go to the adjusted Act 1 index each year for the next 6 years, including the proposed budget for next year. That's a substantial reliance on tax increases over the next several years. So here our recommendations to you are threefold. One is to align those ESSER funds with your strategic priorities. So, you probably will need some of those funds for continuity of operations in 2023-24. You can use those funds to pilot those programs to have the maximum impact on Allentown students and families. And then to the extent possible, like you have been doing for some of those building investments in HVAC and ventilation, you want to try and tie those to those one-time funds to one-time costs, or identify recurring funds to support those in future years. Going back to some of the ideas that we introduced back in January with the financial improvement plan, for some of those gap closing initiatives on the expenditure side, you want to focus on some of those high dollar impact ones. So here we just highlight two of those from that financial plan. The virtual academy, although it does have a cost aspect to it, there is a cost of educating students with that program. Based on what we could see in the data from the district, that is lower than your charter school tuition rate that you're paying for those cyber charter schools. So that is one way to impact that expenditure side of the budget. And then again, going back to that vacancy budget in 2023-4 and beyond, we think that it's a good idea for you to continue to review those vacant positions and your programmatic and operational needs, and then dedicate those funds to supporting those positions over time. So again, we're starting from the position in your budget that you have all those positions filled in future years. So to the extent that either those positions go unfilled for a variety of reasons, just the difficulties of hiring staff or just choices about which programs to fund and when, those will have a significant impact on what those projections look like in future years. So that brings us to the end of our presentation.
Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Could we go back to, I have one question, back to slide 15. I'm going to ask the same question on this slide. So looking at slide 15. Perfect, thank you. Looking at the outlying years 2027 to 28, we see the unassigned fund balance of negative 33 million. And that's under budget scenario number 2, which is the state funding increase as well as local tax increases. And as Ian said, they're not recommending, but they put into this assumption and this 5-year forecast to the Act 1 index. So if we look at this projection as well, adding that $12 million based upon decisions that were made last Thursday and Friday, we would be not at negative 33 million in the outlying years of 2027-28, but 45 million. So I just want to point that out because, you know, the last minute timing of those decisions didn't get into these numbers. I want to make sure my colleagues and I understand, you know, what we're dealing with in terms of the mathematical implications of things, and that these numbers are up to date based upon decisions we've made over the past few days. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Well, thank you, Dean. Thank you, Ian. Mr. Ristakezian, do you want anything else with PFM? And I'll kick off the next agenda item in a moment. Do you have anything else with the PFM presentation?
No, just a real expression of gratitude. I appreciate all the help they're giving us and the guidance to move forward with these projections. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome. Great to see you all. Thank you for having us.
So item number 2 is the final budget for fiscal year 2022 and 23. You know, a lot of work has gone into this by so many people, obviously, and we've been, you know, digesting this as a board over a period of time. So Mr. Ristakezian is going to give us a presentation here shortly, but I wanted to give an opportunity, Dr. Stanford, this being your first budget, if there's anything specifically pertaining to this budget and this presentation that you'd like to intro with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't going to say anything, but because I thought you had stated it well at the start of the meeting. But I think also based on what I've heard so far from some of the community members, I think what I want to say is that what we have to realize is that the state has put us into the inevitable position each year of fighting with each other as opposed to fighting with them about the education of our children. The state has put us in a position of where we have to make these tough decisions each year on whether we are going to fund our students appropriately and provide the type of education they deserve, as opposed to having us in a forum like this, debating and going at each other about how we're going to educate our students. And so I would encourage us to pick up your phone, pick up your pen and paper, pick up your computer and email the governor. Go visit the governor's office. Email your state senator, your state representative. Email or show up at the desk of the Senate president or the House Speaker who wants to give a $1 billion corporate tax cut, but then say they don't have enough money to fund education or to fund the Level Up initiative that they said was needed in order to bring districts like Allentown back up to the level of a Parkland or some other districts around the state. Go talk to them about the fair funding formula that they created years ago and said that Allentown School District was $100 million underfunded according to their estimate. Wasn't something that we made up in Allentown. That was their estimate of how much we were underfunded. But every year they failed to fully fund it. So a lot of the negatives that you're seeing in the numbers today, if we got the money that we're supposed to get from the state, those negatives would go away. And our kids would be properly educated. I toured this district for 3 to 4 months, went into classrooms and saw students who are 2 grade levels behind in a critical number across this district. Saw students who can't have music and performing arts in elementary school because some elected official, as Ms. Billington already stated, 10 to 15 years ago, decided that they were gonna, with the stroke of a pen, cut $30 million out of the Allentown budget. That is still being impacted today on the children today, a generation since. How do I know that? Because I talk to the teachers. And they tell me the stories of how the cuts made in 2010 have never been restored, and the students are suffering because of those cuts. So I would strongly encourage us to show our frustration with what's going on here with those state leaders in Harrisburg. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Stanford. And we're going to switch up the order just a bit because Harry and I talked about this last night, just in terms of the helping this presentation fit in. If we talk about the homestead first, then we can better understand how the homestead fits into the final budget. And if we hit the final budget first, then we have to go back and the homestead would have to be explained. So it's kind of an input into the final budget. So we'll switch it up. And Harry reminded me of that conversation. So thank you.
Sure.
Let's start with the homestead first. Yeah. Because that helps us understand the input into the budget itself, which I think is important, understanding inputs. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thiel. We're essentially going to try to walk through the homestead calculations based on an assumed millage rate of 22.6432. And really walk you through how the revenue is calculated, what the state revenue comes in and how that impacts the ultimate taxpayers. I was asked a question recently around who's the homestead assessments impact. So I did want to highlight that it's really meant for primary permanent residents. It's not meant for tenants. It's not meant for rental units. It's not meant for vacations home. It's really meant for permanent residents within Allentown. Jose, can you go to the next slide, please? So I do want to highlight that the available gaming revenue this year is $12.145 million. If you guys recall, last year's revenue was 9.6 million. So essentially we're getting a $2.5 million increase in our allocation. That $2.5 million spread out over the 15,186 properties gives you a preliminary tax reduction of $799, almost $800 because of the gaming revenue. Last year's decrease was about 603, just to put that into context. So there's definitely additional funds going back into the homestead property owners and the taxpayers. What we do is we take we can go to the next slide, Jose. What we do is we take the allocation that's coming from the state, divide that by the millage rate, and then we have $536 million that needs to be distributed across all of the homestead properties equally. The $12 million in revenue essentially equates to an assessed value of $35,320. So any property that falls below that $35,320 assessment value gets reshuffled and put into the mix, and we recalculate the homestead calculation amount after that. Jose, go to the next slide, please. So that left 105 properties that had a lower value than $35,320. That additional $83,000 would then be distributed amongst the remaining properties. And you get an additional amount that needs to be added to the value. So that 35,320 now becomes 35,491 and 58. We look for properties that have an assessed value that are lower than that and redistribute the remaining amount over those properties, which then gives you an additional $3.88. So when you add up those two totals, you will get a final allocation for all properties with an assessed value higher than 35,491, $803.64 in terms of an allocation for a homestead rebate. So that $803.64 compared to the $603 last year is going to equate to about $188 or so. And so I'm sorry, last year's amount was 616. That's what I got it wrong. So that's about $187 higher than what we allocated last year based on the state allocation. Again, you'll see this on the budget because you're going to see a $2.5 million increase in state aid, and you're going to see a $2.5 million decrease in local tax revenue. We're essentially reallocating those amounts from different sources of local versus state, and you'll see the impact on the taxpayers being a reduction.
So the homestead farmstead exclusion, this is a resolution that is an action item. Any questions before, or I would entertain a motion for this resolution because we have to pass this. Any questions from Mr. Ristakezian?
It should already be on.
It's on the agenda.
I'm trying to turn on your mic.
No.
Mr. Miller, is it?
I'll make the motion.
Oh, you just making a motion? Have a second, please. Second, Mrs. Wilt. Any discussion? Mr. Palmer? I see you trying to,
Is this on?
Oh, they are on.
Just in case, because something seemed a little different. How much, if there was a tax increase, how much would each household be getting in terms of that increase?
So based on the 5.3, which is a 22.6432 rate, each of the households will get $803.64 in terms of homestead rebate.
so,
I mean, like,
go ahead, Mr. Palmer. I don't want to interrupt. Go
I
ahead.
meant, how much would each household estimate their actual bump in tax be without the homestead part in there?
Oh, so you want to know what the impact of the 5.3 is to the households without the homestead?
Yeah,
Okay, give me a second.
Yeah, so if I could jump in, just so that is in the budget presentation. So I think a question is the calculations that you have made for this homestead, farmstead exclusion resolution are driven by what?
They're primarily driven by the tax rate
So,
and the gaming allocation.
so it's driven by the tax rate, the gaming allocation was driven by law, like we essentially can't change this.
You can't change the allocation to us. What we do is we calculate the amount that gets redistributed equally amongst all of the homestead properties.
So our decision-making process for this is,
well, mine wasn't really in.
I just wanted to point that out in case there was questions about that, that's all.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Go ahead, Mr. Palmer.
Well, I think he asked a question, right?
yeah, I was just.
So if we went with that 22.643 based on an average residential value of 155,969, you're looking at a tax increase of about $177.74. And then you take into account the $187. I'm sorry, you take into account the increase from last year to this year, the $803 in rebate, you're actually saving the average taxpayer is saving $9 over their tax bill from last year.
That's what I was, okay.
And that is on one of the slides we'll cover later on.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Palmer?
Yeah.
And this
Thank
was
you.
one of the
Thank you.
reasons
It's very
why
confusing.
we wanted to switch this up, was because this influences, right? It's an input into the whole budget process. Mrs. Conover? You have a question?
So if we didn't do the resolution, not to say that I'm not in agreement with it. Where would that leave us? We would not be entitled to that.
I don't know. That's probably a legal question.
I don't know the legal answer.
Every
You
time
maybe
I-
will help, but I think we're obligated to distribute these funds to the taxpayers regardless of what you do. So there's no real withholding these funds.
We're also obligated to pass a resolution in order to have it done. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you.
So in order to receive the tax break, you have to pass the resolution.
Right.
Okay. Is the homestead program will every homeowner receive the homestead program?
So,
I'm just.
yeah, so I'm gonna, just from my own experience, I mean, the county sends out letters to homeowners. And I'm not, don't work for the county and can't speak to that specifically, but that's their obligation to do that because they're the assessors. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get an understanding of how many people would have the opportunity in this. Let's just say, for example, if every homeowner was to submit it, is there a cap on how many people could receive the homestead program?
So you have 15,186 approved homesteads. That's on slide 2. Of those 15,186, you will have hold on. You will have 105 properties that do not qualify because they're below the assessed value. All the remaining properties will get the allocation. So essentially you're redistributing all of those funds to 15,081 properties. So
And that's
105 are not eligible.
105 now.
You're redistributing over to 15,081 properties.
So those are the previous properties that received, correct? Not the total amount that would be eligible for the program?
Those are all the applications that Lehigh County has supported and put forward with their assessed values. They provide that list to us based on the applications that they get, and then we redistribute equally amongst the property owners.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown, Ms. Brown. Any other questions, comments, where it's discussion? There is a motion on the floor for the resolution. Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed?
I just have a
Oh, I'm sorry.
random, it's really random, I'm sorry. Where are these 105 properties that are worth less than 36,000?
I can't tell you that off of memory, but I can send you the county list that shows you those properties. And it's all based on the parcel IDs, not necessarily address.
Okay.
Any opposed? Is this good, Mr. Solicitor? Are we good to consider that passed? Okay, all right. All right, perfect. Thank you. This goes to the special board meeting following this meeting. All right, Mr. Istakezian, now on to the budget presentation itself.
Okay. Jose, if you go to the next slide, please. So the presentation is going to go in three parts. First, I thought we'd cover the proposed budget from April. Then discuss some of the updates that we made based on more current information available, whether it be from the state, resolved contracts, or even actions that were taken as of last Friday. And then we'll wrap it all up into what we were going to call the final fiscal year 23 budget. So there's a typo on there. It's not a fiscal year 22, it's supposed to be fiscal 23. Thank you, Jose. So as a reminder of what was included in the April proposed budget, at that time, we had no clue what was coming through with state funding. So we went through with the presentation on the balanced budget, and we included 19 million in additional revenue and expenses versus fiscal year 22. The key revenue drivers in the April proposal were $6 million from real estate tax increases, and an additional 13 million from BEF and SEF. As you just saw with the PFM presentation, that's a 10% increase in BEF and a 5% increase in SEF. We also anticipated using $10.5 million in ARP-ESSER dollars just to maintain the operations of the LEA. All other funding, whether it be state or local or federal, were held flat. In terms of the expense drivers, we had budgeted 2,410 positions. That includes 388 vacancies, as well as money set aside to resolve the open contracts and address the recruitment and retention challenges facing the district. So what's happened since April 7th? Jose, next slide, please. Well, we still don't have clarity in terms of what's happening in Harrisburg. So negotiations in Harrisburg are continuing. While the state budget should be completed and passed by June 30th, there's really no guarantee that it will. And furthermore, there's no guarantee that it'll be passed with or without additional increases. So what that means for us is we're still making some assumptions. We're still pondering with what that means if they go further than June 30th. Will they come through with a big increase? Will they come through with something in the near future? Or will all this thing sort of collapse? There's just still plenty of uncertainty out there. In terms of building out a budget, well, what I did was put together our best guess anticipated increases using sources from PASBO. Oh, go ahead.
No, you hit that. I was just going to ask you where the sources were. Thank you.
Using sources from PASBO, just sort of talking through some of the other business managers in Lehigh County in terms of what they're using. So the anticipated increase from my little bit of survey as well as PASBO input is BEF is going to go up between $300 and $500 million range. They're anticipating special ed funding going an additional $50 or $100 million, and level up will essentially be flat versus what it was last year. So that's an additional $100 million. At the end of the day, I'm going to quote what came out today in terms of the ED from PASBO. What the final allocation for education looks like still remains a mystery. So I thought she summed it up really well. Just so we know what we're looking for, we run down middle of the road, if you will. So the range in terms of those allocations is from 150 to 163. We went with the 300 million allocation, which then gives us about 20 million. Given the uncertainties around that, you know, the 300 million in BEF, the 100 million supplemental, and the 50 million increase in SEF seems like a reasonable expectation. And as you saw on the PFM slide, that was one of the higher totals that they went with. So they're actually using the 300 million in their higher allocation. So we think we're on the spot with that one. Not so confident in the other two numbers. I see Mr. Thiel thinking. So with the increase in BEF, we're essentially looking from going from 136 million to 156 million. That's an additional 5 million compared to the proposed budget, but overall, you're looking at about a $19.5 million increase. Other key assumptions we're using. Next slide, Jose. We're still proposing a 5.3% increase. You can see that the state subsidy essentially went from 10% to 14%. And we're still maintaining to use $5.5 million in ARP ESSER funds in terms of maintaining the operations at a LEA. On the expense side, we're included expenses for the newly ratified positions from Thursday and Friday. And I've updated the charter school expenses based on our most current enrollment rates, as well as final rates based on a finalized ADM that came from the state. I do want to highlight that the charter enrollment is based on the enrollment caps. So there's no increases in the charter school enrollment caps. And we're also projecting savings realized through the new PPO healthcare plan.
Any questions? I mean, feel free if anybody has any questions.
Can you say that number again for the amount of that we're using for ESSERs for operations?
Which one? Maintaining the
ESSER.
operations?
The ESSER, I think you said 5 million.
$5.5 million to maintain operations. So what that means is we're essentially using that $5.5 million of one-time funds as an allowable expense to not cut programs, to continue what we're doing, at least in status quo, and improve upon them. So generally they're reserved for, Missy Smith can help me out with this, but they're reserved for teachers, paras, and security. I think I got them right. Yeah, the main. Okay. So hopefully you heard that, but it's primarily salaries and benefits.
Thank you.
The other assumption we're going through here is that there will be no new debt payments. We know that there's a new middle school project on the way. And while we don't have inflationary numbers or really good cost projections, we don't project to go out for new debt until next fiscal year. So you're not seeing an impact of that in this current presentation. Next slide, please, Jose. Thank you. So essentially what you're seeing here on the left side is our budget proposal from April. On the right side is our final budget document. And the main change you're seeing is a real estate tax revenue. This is primarily as a result of the homestead allocation. So as I stated earlier, we got an additional $2.5 million. So we're reducing that from this source of revenue and putting that on the state. Essentially, the state is supplementing the taxes that would have been paid by the taxpayers. All other funding is held flat. Next slide, please, Jose. Mr. Palmer, this is a slide that I was referencing earlier. So our overall taxable value is $5 billion, $5.105 billion, which equates to a revenue of $115 million if it's at 100% collection, and that's a gross number. The tax increase will essentially go from 21.5036 to 22.6432. The average property owner with a value of $155,969 will end up with a tax bill of $3,532. That's an increase of $177.74 from prior year. At the same time, the homestead rebate will provide them with relief of $187.07, which then brings the net impact down to $9.33. So while the tax rate is increasing, the tax bill for the homeowners is actually going to be reducing.
Any questions around that? I just wanted to get some space because I know we talked about it before with the homestead. Everybody good?
Okay. So same format goes for the other revenue sources. Essentially, we're moving to the state revenue. You're seeing the increase in BEF as well as the increase in Homestead gaming revenue. So the first line is the basic ed funding. You'll see that going up by about 5 and change. And then you'll see that all other state revenue going up by the 2.5 million we took away from local funds. So it's really shifting the source of revenue, but the revenue remains the same. The other two line items that are changing are going to be the FICA and the state and reimbursement of employee benefits. Just a reminder that they're formula driven. So you're seeing it change primarily because of the actions from Thursday and Friday. Using the assumptions from the earlier slide, you're also seeing a slight decrease in SEF. But it's still higher than what we got last year. So you're still looking at a percentage increase in the SEF. It's just not as aggressive of a projection as we did when we did the proposed budget. All in all, you're expecting state revenue of about $249 million, technically 250-ish. On the federal side of the house, we did get our final allocations. Thank you, Jose. So you are seeing a slight decrease in Title 3 and 4. At the same time, you're seeing a little bit of an increase in Title 1 and 2. Overall, there's not a significant enough change in terms of the title dollars. I do want to highlight the fact that the ARP ESSER dollars, what we were projecting to use for maintaining operations was 10.5 million. We've reduced that to 5.493 million based on the upgraded assumption of additional state aid. And then that allows us to refocus those dollars into other areas that have a better return on our investment and more than maintaining operations, actually building and improving upon them. So that essentially takes care of all our revenue changes. I'm not sure if there are any questions, but I'll stop to see if there are any.
Okay.
No. Okay. So we'll move on to the expense side of the house. Jose, thank you. I'm going to spend a little bit of extra time on the personnel cost, the salary and benefits, because this is still something that's a little bit settling in. And I just want to make sure we captured not only the right costs in our budget, but the right positions that were voted upon. Key assumptions that we're making for our largest controllable item is all existing positions will remain filled. Extra pay for extra duty remains flat. Open expired contracts will be settled and vacancies will be filled. So one thing to celebrate is recently you guys approved the clerical contract. So that's one more down, only about 4.5 to go. The cost of living increases will be based on the labor agreements. There was also an approval for increased summer wages for 10-month employees that was done at the last meeting. Those will be paid out at our projected rates. And then there's a slight increase in terms of the PSERS contribution. So again, the main assumptions is what we're budgeted for, they're going to be filled. We're going to attempt to settle those contracts at reasonable paces within our budgetary limits. And then the healthcare and RX expenses, while they continue to fluctuate, we're optimistic that we're going to realize some savings as a result of the shift to the 750 PPO plan. Looking at this slide, this is a combination of actions that were taken last week, as well as new proposals for positions that we're doing at the building level. I'm going to pass that on to Jen to talk to it.
Yeah, I'll jump in a little bit here. As Mr. Ristakasian mentioned, there are positions in here that we are proposing in this final budget. And just to be clear, in accordance with the policy, should the positions be approved in the budget today, we would bring them forward for ratification per policy 301 in July. But some of the areas we're looking to increase support at the building level, we are looking to add assistant principals, 5 of them. 3 at the elementary level and 2 at the high school level. At the high school level, specifically at Allen and Deerfield, with a focus on operations of managing operations in those buildings, additional support there. We are looking to add a special education supervisor. The current load for that supervisor is all 14 buildings. We're currently looking to split that support so that 7 elementaries have resource via one supervisor and another 7 via the other. We're going to go into the central admin positions on later slides so we can, as Harry mentioned, be sure we're firmed up on the exact positions, the cost, and where we landed after Friday evening's meeting. We're looking to add 7.5 positions, primarily around what I'll call compliance to maintain reasonable class sizes, a position in the elementary schools, and then 2 positions in the middle school, with the remaining positions in the high school to keep the numbers reasonable. We're requesting to add 6 professional support positions. We're looking to increase reading specialist support so that our reading specialists don't share more than 2 schools. Currently, we have some reading specialists that share 3 buildings. You may be aware that Ms. Pollock worked long and hard with the City Health Bureau to get immunization resources up in our buildings. We're looking to add an immunization nurse that would fill that function and help ensure kids are not excluded due to immunization issues. We need to add 3 autistic support classrooms, 2 in the elementary, 1 in the high school, due to caseload and increases in our early intervention population that are arriving to us in kindergarten. Along with those special education classrooms, we're requesting to add the para support for those rooms. We typically staff those rooms with 2 paras per teacher. So you'll see 3 special education teachers accompanied then by the support of paras. And finally, we're looking to add 7 safety officers. We're looking to increase the support across the elementary schools, specifically some of those larger buildings and some of those buildings that may not have an assistant principal. So we're requesting 7 of those, with 1 of them going to the high school. That would be Tira.
Jose, can you back up 1 slide, please? So what you're seeing at the top under the proposed positions is overall cost of all of these positions at 3.133 million. Keep in mind that includes the already approved positions. So we didn't want to parse them out. We just wanted to show a real clear picture in terms of what the overall expense would look like in the new positions, including the 18 that we're going to review now. And on the right side of that, you can see the projected salary increase. Thanks, Jose. Moving on to the board action from Thursday. The positions on this screen, I believe, are the ones that were approved with the motion from Thursday's board meeting. Many of these positions are already filled. And in essence, your vote ratified the positions that were already created in fiscal year 22, perhaps not necessarily budgeted for. In total, there were 17 positions that were approved. And you've already met some of the candidates. So for example, director of charter or procurement, they've been ratified in terms of board action, but not explicitly in terms of the positions that were approved. If you go to the next slide, this slide is showing you the positions that we've budgeted for and the allocation in the budget that was presented in April. So from what I understand, there was 13 positions plus 3, and this would equate to the 16 positions. So this includes the 3 chiefs, as well as the 13 positions that were included and voted on in the proposed April budget. All in all, you're looking at a salary expense of about $1.66 million. There were additional positions, if you go to the next slide, that I wrangled with, and I just want to make sure that I'm very clear in terms of what I'm removing and how we're changing position control, because
I have a question before you move on to this.
sure.
I believe last week it was supposed to be 16 positions, but then we took 1 out because STEM wasn't included. Am I correct when I say that? Because you just said 17, and I just want clarity to make sure that my understanding is
So the
correct.
17 is from Thursday. And that would have been positions that we had created, and STEM was a budgeted position that we've had for quite some time. So the director of STEM is a position we've had, and it may or may not have been approved in the past, but I believe that was one of the action items from Thursday's motion.
Yeah, the STEM position was actually budgeted for in April. And so we included it in the summary of the first motion from Thursday evening. So if you went back to the June 23rd slide, you'll see the Director of STEM is in there as a budgeted position on that slide.
I guess my confusion is, I remember hearing 16, and because it wasn't included, it then became 15, but 17 was never an option. So I'm trying to understand, where does the 17 come in at when we consistently talked about 16, then it went to 15 because one wasn't included that you were not aware of because you weren't present at the time.
So can I ask you, are you referring to the Thursday vote or the Friday vote?
We discussed Friday, Thursday, and Friday, but the understanding was these positions that already were approved for these positions previously, but
If I may. So the 17 that was on Thursdays was included in the fiscal, because if you look at the header of his slide, it says fiscal year 22 budget. That's the budget year that we're currently in. These are the positions that were in the budget that we are currently in. And that was a list of 17 positions. And then on Friday, it was a list of 16 positions, but we had to make adjustments to, and this is what I think you're referring to, we had to make adjustments to that list of 16 because 3 of the positions that were approved on Thursday were also on the list of 16. And the reason that is because when we worked with Mr. Sultanic to create the motions, he stated that they had to be individual motions, which meant that there may be some duplications with the motions, with the idea that whatever passed or didn't pass, would be reflected clearly in those motions, if that makes sense to you.
okay. I just wanted to confirm.
Sure.
Thank you.
It was part of the motion that we passed. I think it was motion F. We passed on Thursday.
Okay, thank you.
Jose, I'm sorry, can you back up 2 slides? Ms. Brown, if it's okay, I'd just like to highlight this slide to you.
Okay, thank you.
So this is again was fiscal year 22, as Dr. Stanford said, it's this current year we're about to wrap up in the next, 3 days or so. What you see on the left side is the positions. What you see is whether or not it was included in the fiscal year budget, which means that we've essentially included that in the 22 budget, 21, 22 budget, and the STEM is there. On the right side, you'll see somewhere we have not included that in the budget. What that means is we've essentially recreated the positions after the budget was passed, whether it was because we found that we had ESSER dollars allocated and we wanted to utilize them in those areas, or other sources of funds became available and that became an emergent position. So of the 17 you guys approved, most were created in fiscal 22, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were included in the budget. For this current budget, fiscal 23, all of those positions were included because they become existing positions. In addition to those, Jose, go to the next slide. We're now including an additional 16. So those 17 existing that were essentially ratified from prior year, plus 16, none of which is duplicated thus far. So those 16 positions are highlighted. And they're in alphabetical order, but essentially there are 13 positions based on a work chart and my understanding of what was presented, as well as the 3 chiefs, which then brings you to 16. So the 17 are from last year's budget, which we're currently living in. And these are the proposed budget that essentially takes effect July 1st. And then those are the budgeted salaries that were included in the April presentation.
If I may also, because some of the positions on this slide are also repurposed from the previous slide as well. So it's not all new positions on this particular slide. Correct?
And that's not my understanding, but
So like, for instance,
The
let me
next
give you an
slide
example.
could clarify
Let me give you an example. Director of Core Enrichment was repurposed from the math director on the previous slide. And when we talk about the chief academic officer, that was repurposed from another position that was vacated last November, correct?
That's not my understanding, but if we go to the next slide,
All right.
perhaps that can clarify. So
This is why it's confusing, right? And I'm not trying to start nothing, but I need to have an understanding when I'm making a decision and when information is being given to me.
Sure.
So I understand that we had a setback on Thursday, which led us into Friday, which probably led us into receiving our information late for today. What I typically do is when I receive information, I compare it to what was already given to me. And because I just got my information today, I was unable to do that. So I feel like I'm even more confused because it seems like we're not on the same page.
Well-
And maybe it's just me, but I need to have an understanding so I can say, this is the decision that I need to make. I want to be effective, and I
Sure.
can't be effective if I'm not, clear and I don't understand.
Well, and that's part of the reason why we want to have this conversation as part of the budget meeting. And essentially what I did on the next slide is try to reconcile the two lists, ones that were on Thursday, ones that were approved on Friday, to highlight what I believe are the changes that you guys intended to do. And this may also speak to some of the repurposing that potentially needed to occur between those positions. So for example, the director of virtual campus, that's not on either one of those lists, so that's going to be an additional position above the 16. But if you look at the director of math, that is in fact a repurposed position because the director of math position will be removed, which means we're going to remove a position that you already approved based on Thursday. And we're going to now rename it, if you will, to director of core enrichment. That becomes a duplicate position, which means the director of math position will be removed and no longer included in position control. When you look at the director of intervention, that's again another repurposed position. That means the director of intervention will turn into the director of infrastructure practices and professional development. Director of intervention will be removed, the new position will remain. That's a net effect of 0. So if there's net effect of 0, essentially you're not seeing dollar amounts there. So the director of virtual campus and the community coordinator / Century Promise are the two additional positions that I was not able to rectify. And if the intent is to move them forward, the impact is 189, 135. And my understanding is the intent is to move them forward. All the other positions that don't have a dollar value and have some notes, essentially we're going to remove one or the other. So following that through with the ED Elementary West, there's no action necessary because you have the senior ED, an ED of East, and that's the West. So it's one position being repurposed. And the Title IX coordinator is going to be removed and replaced with the ED of Elementary East, which creates a duplicate position. And that's the net effect. So these two positions plus the 18 plus the 16 equals 18. And that's how I figured it out. If I made mistakes, now's the time to voice it so I can make adjustments.
Well, again, I just want to make sure that when I look at the slide, the previous slide to this one, and my understanding is that the chief academic officer was a position that was existing in the district and has been carried forward and hadn't been filled.
It's not a position that's been in position control because it's a contract position. So that is included in the budget, and the budgeted salary is 160,000 for that.
Okay. And when we look at the chief culture, equity, and advancement officer, again, that was an unfilled position that has been vacant for at least 4 or 5 months. More than that, probably 7 or 8 months now.
So same concept. This is a position that we're putting in position control. And so we're going to add that 150,000 into our budget. The vacant position, because there's a contract position that was emptied, is not included in the prior year budget or in the April budget. Sorry.
So question. What I hear you saying, Dr. Stanford, is that those positions, those two you just referenced, were in the the budget that we're currently in right now that ends in 3 days. Is that what you're saying?
That's my understanding.
Is that the case?
Not with the CAO position. There was a position that was held, I don't know the exact title, but it was Chief Equity, something or another. That was a
So-
contract position.
So
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think, you know, and then let me just understand, I understood that. Let me understand what you did here is you said, hey, on the budget that we're going to vote on for the next fiscal year, which begins in, oh, yeah,
Mhm.
48 hours. No, wait, my math is wrong, 96 hours. No, not that either, 72. Remedial math. That the April budget didn't have those positions in it.
It did not. And the reason
Okay.
it didn't is because we did not have position control.
Yeah.
And so part of this exercise is to reconcile what we have in our systems versus what we actually have in
So-
terms of
So
positions.
that's where I think there's a disconnect. Now to my colleagues, let me rephrase what just happened. Dr. Stanford said those two positions, Chief Academic Officer, Culture Equity Advancement, he was under the impression that those positions existed in the current budget that we're operating in today, right? Mr. Ristakezian verified that those positions were not in the April budget that we had voted on, the proposed budget, right? Okay, we follow it? We good,
No,
right?
I'm not following. I thought he said
No.
one of them wasn't. One of them wasn't. I didn't hear definitively that the other one was. And maybe I wasn't listening properly, but maybe he can say it again because he's still here.
He who?
Mr.
Okay,
Ristickes.
I just want to make sure I understood which one we're talking about.
And if you look at the slide, on the right-hand side, on each column, it says fiscal year 23 budgeted salary. So the chief academic officer, I'm assuming fiscal year 23 budgeted salary means the budget, the temporary budget that was passed in April. Yes. or no?
Correct. All of these positions were in the April budget, but that doesn't mean that they're in position control.
No, I get.
And
I
that's the
understand.
difference, but they were all in the April budget.
Yeah, the distinction I was trying to make was between what's new and what has been repurposed from a previous year's budget.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at, right? Was we as a board, and I'm going to speak, and this is where I wanted to ask my colleagues, is that those two positions, we were with the understanding that those are currently positions that are just not filled, but are funded in the current budget. Right?
That was
Am
my
I correct that? Right,
Mhm.
right. So, but these weren't carried over specifically, and I think this is where we're getting into the letter of the law, the jot and the tittle, the policy 301, right, which is forcing this kind of discrepancy, is they were not clearly articulated in position control, which Mr. Ristakezian was using because, you know, we've just recently started to get that in order and use it. So that wasn't reflected in the proposed budget that we passed. So he's updating that to make sure it is reflected. But again, back to our understanding as a body and Dr. Stanford's understanding, those two positions are funded in today's budget. But just not filled. It's one of those vacancies we're carrying. Does that make sense?
It does, and to kind of put it in very simple terms.
I just want to make sure I understood. I wasn't even here Friday night.
Well, I wasn't either, but essentially these are positions that we're trying to reconcile. So whatever's in the budget will now tie into position control.
Right.
And vice versa. So moving forward, we won't run into the challenges of trying to reconcile what we think we created, what we did, and then you saw with the other slides, even though we created positions, that didn't necessarily mean it tied out to the budget. So here's our chance to reconcile it once and for all, and moving forward, establish processes where we could say, here's a new position before it gets added into anywhere else. Let's make sure we throw it into position control in the budget. So the point of this exercise is to true all that up, not to point fingers one way or the other, but say, here's what I think I heard. So we can all agree these 16 were in the April budget, where they just need to be added into position control. And we talked about that recently. In addition to these 16, you go to the next slide, Jose. We have two additional that were not budgeted for in April, so these were not. And then we have some positions that are duplicates and one or the other is going to be removed so that we don't double budget for them in the future. My comments are what I believe needs to be removed. And so it'll tell you Director of Math position to be removed, Director of Intervention, Title IX, so on and so forth. So that we'll now have a very clear picture of what's in our systems versus what's in our budget versus what you guys think we have. And then this is our attempt to reconcile that. So I think we captured it, but again, I'm happy to answer if I misinterpreted something.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Thank you for asking the question. Clarifying. Thank you, Dr. Stanford, Mr. Stakezian. Are we good on these last 3 slides? Everybody good? All right. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Continue.
So point of clarity. On this particular slide, I don't know what the motion was or how it read. We are essentially agreeing to create the Director of Virtual and the Community Core Coordinator / Century Promise. And then we're agreeing to remove the other 3 positions with the one not being touched. So we're going to create 2 positions, remove 3, and no action on the ED of West because it's a budget neutral event. We're just simply renaming it.
Everybody good with that? Dr. Stanford?
Okay, thank you.
Awesome.
So, moving on to the next slide. Essentially, what you're seeing here is the impact versus from our proposed to our final. You're going to see the 1.9 million increase in salaries. You're going to see the increase in benefits. Essentially, that's another 820,000 or so. And then I've reworked the charter school enrollment numbers. So that number went down. Why? Because we have an updated rate based on our ADM and our budget, of course. And we also have assumption that the enrollment caps will remain intact. So that number will be reduced by about $1.2 million. Overall, you're looking at $395 million budget. And the changes are essentially because of the salary benefits in the charter schools.
Mrs. Conover.
Yes, Harry, can you just make mention? I believe I understand it, but we had a lot of people that retired. Right? So how does that affect us? Does it even out? Can you talk a little bit briefly about that?
It depends. So if a person retires, the position remains. So we budget for positions, not necessarily for a person. And what we budget for is what we anticipate to be the starting or midpoint salary, depending on the position. If somebody retired and we intend to fill the position, we will continue to budget for that position at the full annualized salary. If somebody retires and there's no intent to fill, we essentially will put that position on hold. And moving forward in the next budget cycle, it will not be budgeted for.
Thank you.
Which kind of begs the next question is, are all positions that are approved funded in the budget today, the proposed budget?
All of the positions that we just talked through are in this proposed final budget. And that includes taking away the 3 or so positions we talked about on that other slide.
Including those on slide 13 for the principal,
Yeah.
assistant principals, the
Correct.
All right, Mr. Stakezian.
Hold on, I want to make sure I verify it.
All right.
All of the proposed positions, that includes the Act 93 AA para and security, are in the budget based on those dollar amounts and those numbers. So once the budget gets approved, we will essentially load those into position control and go through the same process of controls. But that $3.1 million is in the budget.
And
That's
so
in front of you.
are there any vacancies throughout the school district right now that are not funded in the budget?
Not that I'm aware of. And actually, as part of this budget process, we sat down with the academic team, with the operations team, and we essentially reviewed all of the positions that are in position control to determine if we still need that. What is the proper count of positions? What's the student ratios? Jen can probably talk to that a lot more than I can, but we really took a hard look at what positions we need, what positions are essential. And the result of what you're seeing on the new positions is not only for compliance purposes, but to really improve our our programs and make sure that we have the right ratios in place in terms of staff, students, and
So,
programs.
so there's no unfunded positions.
Not unfunded, but I will tell you there's some hard to fill positions. So what we budgeted for doesn't necessarily mean is what we're going to end up with in terms of a salary.
So what's the total of, do you have a rough idea what the total amount of unfilled positions is? That is a bit of a challenge because we're not at market rate.
Not necessarily those that are a bit of a challenge, but we have about 400 positions that are vacant. And that's going to be equal to about $15 million. As we close out the contracts, we're optimistic that it'll help us with our recruitment efforts as well as our retention efforts, but we've got to close out the contracts faster than what we're losing staff. Do you want to talk through the process to reconcile position control?
So is that number going to go up with the contracts then, or do we have those assumptions in there?
Well, it's give or take.
Sure.
Because part of our strategy with the contracts has been to ensure that the contract cost is not exceeding too much. So while we are attempting to reconcile positions, we are also scrubbing positions that perhaps are unnecessary or duplicative.
Okay. Great. Any other questions for Mr. Sarkeesian continues? Okay, thank you.
Sure. So essentially, the next slide, I think, puts it all together. When you parse that in, you'll see that all the revenue items we've talked about, as well as the expense items, and you still have a balanced budget. What I will reiterate is some of the assumptions we're making may or may not come true. We are heavily dependent on what the state will put forth, and we're optimistic that they'll come through with an increased funding. I just can't guarantee that it'll be at the level that we've projected in our budget. We're still utilizing all of the other assumptions in the slide. So our new balance for budget is $395,586,733. So with that, I will conclude the presentation. Jose, next slide, please. This is a summary of the assumptions that we're making. Again, it's a 5.3 on the real estate, 14 on BEF, so on and so forth. This is an action item that I will be recommending for approval at the special board meeting later tonight.
Okay. Any other questions from Mr. Sarkeesian on the presentation itself? And this is an action item as presented to us here tonight in this form. And I would accept the motion. Mrs. Wilt, is there a second? Mr. Palmer. Any discussion? Mr. Miller?
Mr. Thiel, I have a question for Harry. Harry, I'm curious what the administration budget was in fiscal year 22 versus what it is projected in 23.
When you say administration budget, you're talking about what? The overall?
The central admin.
Oh. So we don't have that number per se with that rework. Overall, the admin positions, whether they were in the buildings, whether they're in admin building or other locations, for 21-22 was roughly 12.5 million. What we have in this budget is going to be 11, 15, about 15 or so. But that includes all building positions, and that includes all the proposed positions you saw on that one slide.
Correct. And I just want to remind the board and new board members that last year at this time, we invested about $1.3 million. And Jen, is that about correct in those new positions that we added? Director of Charter, procurement, yeah, about $1.3 million. So we invested in the administration last year. And I think that it's important to recognize that we've had other expenses throughout the district, whether it's the teacher's contract increases or we have a planned middle school coming up. So we need to plan for that. But I think it's important that we be mindful of overspending in a certain area and wait for those state numbers. I am going to move to amend the budget to hold the administrative number flat and not increase it to 1.6. And I would plead to my fellow board members, in doing that, we wait until we know what the state funding number is. We've made the investment in the administration, and we're aware of the fact that we can go reopen the budget once we have those state numbers and increase investment in administration.
So we do have a motion, Mr. Miller, just so we get this clear for everybody, to amend what was presented by the administration here tonight, to keep the central administration numbers flat from year over year.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay, from 22 to 23. Is there a second for that amendment, that motion to amend?
I'll second.
Ms. Harris? Any discussion?
What does
And
flat look
what-
like? Yeah,
So go ahead, Ms. Conover.
yeah, what is flat? What does that mean?
So on that, it includes those 16 positions we created last year. It includes that number. There's plenty of vacancies, and the current vacancy number in the administration is, I'll put you on the spot, Jen. Okay. The point is that the money is allocated to the administration right now increased 1.3 million last year. So the money's there for the administration to go higher. So we're not restricting their ability to hire. We're just allowing time for us to have the state numbers to then make it an additional investment in the administration. So so to answer your question, is flat includes all those new positions we ratified in the first agenda item on Thursday. And we can pull that
And you
slide
said
up if
keep
you
it
want,
flat for, no, I'm following. And you flat for how long? Until when?
until we have the state funding numbers.
I don't agree with that. And I'll tell you why I don't agree with it. Because we already know, I think it's been spoken before that several times, that we don't get what we're supposed to be from the state, So we know whatever it is we get from the state is not gonna be enough. So I'm not willing to play games with what our kids need. I don't, I don't agree with that.
But structurally, long term is we're looking at those projections. We're pushing 200 million in unassigned, underfunded, like fund balance, 200 million. Those small decisions will impact that. So I'm asking to see what that number is before we make detrimental decisions on long-term structural impacts.
I don't agree. Because what are we gonna do? So when we were going over those numbers, when we're talking about 2027, what are we gonna do in the meantime? Are we gonna do nothing? Are we gonna try to get revenues? What are we?
So I'm asking it more of the phased approach like we talked about last Friday. It's last year we invested in the administration, and paras. This year we're investing in the teachers, and we've clerical as well. There's other expenses. We just being an underfunded school district, it's
So help me understand why we have to hold our kids, in my opinion,
right.
hostage, why we gotta go flat and do nothing.
Right.
Until we find out from somebody else, again, I'm gonna go back to, people come before this board a lot, asking for things. And I heard somebody say, yeah, but they only coming to us for $2 million, $3 million one time. And the decisions that we make, those are gonna be decisions that are compounding over the years. I don't agree with keeping them. Now, I don't know how the other board members feel, and if I'm wrong, help me understand. That's not what I'm willing to do. So I'm just being honest.
Fair enough.
Sure.
So
Thank you, Mr. Conover. Mr. Palmer?
what would be the difference between us waiting for the state's proposed budget and doing it now?
You'd have, the state came with additional funding that we're not anticipating, we'd be able to cover that additional investment.
So if the state came with the funding that we were anticipating, would you still say no?
Yeah, I mean, you're raising the taxes to 5.3%. That Act 1 index is only 5.3% because we're a poorer school district. So that the calculation on that number is because the poorer you are, the higher you can raise taxes. It's not, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So I'm asking that we hold off on that additional expense until we have that number.
So one of the reasons why I can't really agree with that is because Dr. Stanford, I believe, and you can chime in here, he made it clear that if we waited till, let's say, August to try to hire, it would be a very difficult ability for him to be able to do such a thing to the point of where you might as well wait until next year. So you would essentially be putting this off until next year.
That's, the positions are already created, right? And the additional funding that we invested last year is there as well. There's vacancies in the administration that funding we can use to hire. So, but if he came to us with 20 people standing in front of us to hire, he could come back in front of the board and say, we need to increase the Act 93 budget.
If I may, the practical application of what you're describing is just not there. Because once you get past a certain date in July, in order for a person to get out of their contract, they have to get permission of the district that they work for. And so what we are doing is as Mr. Palmer has said, is effectively pushing this off into next year. Because the bottom line is that we're at the tail end of the hiring season for education. Okay. And we've got interviews and hiring processes already in place right now. And so what you are effectively saying is we're going to put all of that on hold.
That's not, you already have the budget amount of money.
No, it's not about the money. It's about the process of interviewing people and going through the steps we need in order to hire the people we need to put in place for the start of the school year.
Understood.
So what I'm saying to you right now is that we're in the middle of interviewing people. So if what you have proposed, I wouldn't feel comfortable interviewing somebody because I don't know if there's going to be a position at the end of the interview.
You have the opportunity to come back in front of the board, just like you do with every position, every hire, to reallocate that money.
But you're not listening to what I'm saying to you. Yes, I can do that, but that person may have already gone and got another job. So then I'm gonna have to start the interview. I'm gonna have to start the whole process all over again during a school year. And quite frankly, again, if anybody even applied and they work for an existing school district, they're gonna have to get that school district's permission even to take the position if we have one to offer them. So effectively what you're doing is delaying everything until next summer. And what I'm saying to you is, just like we've gone the last 2 years with administrative positions being unfilled, and then we wonder why the teachers and principals come back to us and say, why can't central office support us better than what they're doing right now? Because that's what I heard when I did my fireside chats and I did my focus groups. I got an earful sitting with teachers for 3 hours in each session with them, telling me how they're not getting the proper support, how teachers have to stay up late at night downloading curriculum, how teachers have to stay up late at night dealing with their lesson plans, how teachers have to stay up late at night after they've taught a full day to try and put together their lesson plans because they don't get the proper support from central office.
I understand the money and the positions are already allocated. But we can't, as a underfunded school district, we cannot go and hire all these people at once. It's just not, it's not fiscally smart to do that.
But what you're doing is rehashing the debate that was had on Friday, is what you're doing.
Yep.
Because we already talked about the money. We already talked about the positions. And so you're rehashing that debate all over again, but you're trying to put a different dress on it in order to try and make the argument seem like it's a reasonable argument. And what I'm saying to you, just like I said on Friday, is that if we're gonna do that, then you're putting everything on hold for a year. Well, I disagree with you.
That's where we can agree to disagree, but yes.
So there's a motion on the floor. The motion is the budget as has been presented by the administration. There's an amendment motion on the floor that the central administration personnel budget remains flat from last year to this budget. And that amendment has been made by Mr. Miller. It's been seconded by Ms. Harris. I just want to reset where we are. And we're still in a time of discussion. Is there any further discussion?
So
Yes, Ms. Brown.
what are we voting on? Because you just mentioned two.
No. So it's a
what are we-
motion to amend. So the entire budget as presented, the only thing the amendment motion changes out of the budget that we sat through the presentation, right? That Mr. Ristakezian and the team did, and then Dr. Stanford, is that the amendment Mr. Miller made, seconded by Ms. Harris, is that the central admin from 22 year to fiscal 23 year would remain flat from year over year. That's the amendment. So we're discussing that amendment and just that amendment at this particular time.
Okay, that was my
I
question.
just want to
Okay,
make sure
yeah.
I'm
I
understanding.
just want to
too.
reset the Robert's Rule of Order. That's where we are.
That
okay.
was my question.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding too. So,
Certainly.
and this is more just a question for in case we were to open it back up, we would need to get at least 1.5 million more than estimated for you to be willing to look back into adding these positions.
Not specifically, yeah. I mean, we.
Is there a
we-
number that you're looking for? Or-
Like post us approving this budget and this amendment and then going back after we have the state numbers?
Yeah.
So let's say it's in a week. No, I mean, then we'll know what we got to renegotiate that. But
Why we gotta keep coming back?
because that's the reality of this district being underfunded is that we don't have money to just,
The reality.
Hang on. Mr. Palmer, were you asked a question? Are you satisfied with that?
So I think you didn't have like a specific number you were looking for.
right, I'm waiting for the state numbers.
No, I mean like
No.
so we have an estimate.
Right.
So you want more than the estimate in order to look back into these positions,
Correct.
correct? But do you have an amount that you're looking for more than the estimate?
Not specifically, no.
Okay.
Ideally, governor's Wolf proposal. But that's
I
not
would
realistic.
love that too.
You good? You good?
Yeah,
Mrs. Conover and then Dr. Stanford.
This is putting lipstick on the pig. This is the same thing we went over. Why would we have to come back here to ask for the same old no that you guys are trying to push? It just doesn't make sense. How come we just can't pass it the way it is?
Okay, Dr. Stanford.
That was the point I was going to make, is because we talked about on Friday that what was decided on Friday would be phase one, which includes the position that Mr. Aristakazian has gone through in his proposal. I'm sorry, in his presentation. And then the positions that were not included on Friday, we would have further conversation about those positions after the state budget came through. So now what he's proposing now is that the positions that we discussed on Friday not go forward. The ones that were approved on Friday not go forward, and those be held into after the state budget.
So clarification though, this is a technical. The positions were approved according to policy 301. What the amendment does, it does not fund those positions that were approved in policy 301 on Friday. So I just want to be clear on what.
Yeah, but I want to add though, your clarification that the budget conversation was a huge conversation on Friday. So that that vote on Friday under policy 301 was not devoid of the budget conversation.
Understood. And this is the budget vote, right? I'm going to be very parliamentary here. Okay. And I'm going to keep order and focus to what we need to do as a body. And we can have as much discussion as we need. This is our meeting, by the way, not their meeting. Right. So I just want to be clear on what is before us right now. Okay. It is the funding of positions, not the removal of positions with policy 301. I just want to be clear. We're not like, I understand the nuance. Don't get me wrong. I clearly understand the nuance. I just want to make sure the technical side of it is understood and that amendment still sits with a second from Ms. Harris. So was that you, Ms. Conover?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Mrs. Conover.
Yeah, but this puts us in a position where we still can't do anything. So we still can't do anything. So if this amendment goes through, we wasted our time at the meeting that we had Friday that you weren't at. And we're gonna be right back where we started. Our kids are not gonna get what it is that they need in order for them to be successful. And I'm really having a hard time trying to understand why you guys are adamant about not making it work for our kids.
Okay.
I'm talking about you, the same people.
Who else? Who hit the buzzer?
That was me.
Mr. Miller?
So we created, remember I made the suggestion to make that amendment, so we'd create the 16 positions, and then you made the amendment. I didn't make the amendment
I
last.
didn't make the amendment,
on
but I was in
Friday.
agreement with the amendment. But
Right.
this is today, it's like potato.
No.
You know what I mean? Come on. I mean, anybody who sat in that meeting or anybody who was not here on Thursday or Friday, if you go to YouTube and look at the meeting, We sat here for almost 3 hours. Clearly, you will be able to see that the decisions that you're proposing right now, because this is not what you told me yesterday, because I would have said no the other day, right? But you're still trying for it. And what you're asking clearly, because it was said over and over and over again, that if we do not act now, that we were going to be putting our kids in a position where they're not going to get the services that they need in terms of being educated.
Mr. Palmer?
I mean, I think she kind of just was saying most of what I was gonna say. It's just, I can't imagine trying to do this and not have a number of what you're actually looking for. Because if we're funded by the state and we get exactly what their estimate is, then as far as I'm concerned, we've already approved it. I don't see why we would need to put it off for him to not be able to hire for this whole year. I mean, I know it sounds bad, but we have to build up an administration that can take care of our teachers. If we're not taking care of our teachers, then who is at this point? So I know school is rough. I know the teachers have it rough. I know our parents have it rough. And I know we're going through contract discussions. And I know that we're an underfunded school district, but if you don't have a good top, the bottom's going to fall. So I can't tell him not to hire.
I agree. Go ahead, Mr. Steele.
You good, Mr. Palmer? Mr. Miller?
I agree, and that's why creating the positions was the first step in getting those. We all acknowledged, or the ones that voted for acknowledged the importance of those positions. But the fiscal reality of the school district is that we can't just then go spend our money on them. We have how many vacancies in the central admin? So let's say it's a $1.25 a head, if not more, roughly.
You could estimate at least 100,000 per position.
So it's $1 million that we're budgeting for the administration, that we're allowing them to go hire. We created the positions. The administration can come to us and say, we have this person for this position that you guys created per policy 301. And then we say yes or no. It gives us that second opportunity to vote on that person. So,
Okay, there's an amendment on the floor. Motion to amend. Any other discussion? I will speak my piece before I call a roll call vote, just so we can get clarity and not do a verbal vote, even though this is committee of the whole. So I give everybody else an opportunity. Chairing the meeting, I just want to explain why I will vote the way I vote. And I will vote for the amendment because I have sat through a lot over 8 years on this board where we have struggled with the fiscal affairs of the school district. And I do believe we need more central admin. I do believe we need good administrators in place. I do believe we need positions in the buildings in place. And we continue to struggle. And I do agree with Dr. Stanford in that this is the state's problem pushing down upon us. Clearly, that by their own admission, as you stated before, Dr. Stanford, $100 million underfunded. We would not be having this conversation if we were funded even to the tune of 40, 50 million out of that $100 million. So roll call vote, please, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Brown,
This is for the amendment. Right?
This is for the, thank you. This is for the amendment to keep the central administration budget line items flat from year over year. That's all this is.
Okay. I vote no.
Ms. Conover,
Absolutely not.
Ms. Harris,
No.
Ms. Matheson,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
yes.
Ms. Ortiz,
No.
Mr. Palmer, Mr. Teal,
Yes.
Ms. Wilt. 6-0, motion failed. 6-3, sorry.
Thank you. Okay, so now back on the floor is the original motion. Who made the original motion? I didn't write that down. Do we have that, Mr. Secretary? The original motion to approve the budget as presented by the administration?
Mrs. Wilt,
Thank you.
seconded by Mr. Palmer.
Thank you. Great. I just wanted to reset that. Okay. Any discussion on the budget as presented by the administration this evening?
So I have a question.
Yes, please, Ms. Brown.
So if we vote right now, we're voting for the entire budget. That's including the increase, the tax increase, correct?
That is correct.
So my question would be, could we separate that from the budget? Or
You can, and I will accept any advice there, but you can make a motion to amend.
okay,
Instead of a 5.3%, you can change that number to what you like. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. If you want to approve the budget, the budget is as presented. So it's either a yes or no on the budget. If you're asking to change some component of it, whether that's the tax component or as we just had, the component related to some of these particular positions or particular line items, you would have to seek to amend that. One option to deal with that, what I understand your question partially to be is, can you sort of voice the opinion about the tax cut with the tax increase while voting potentially one way or the
I want
other on
to
the
vote
budget?
separately. That was.
Or you want a separate vote? I don't know that
Yes.
you can do it that way unless you want to
Mm.
seek to amend it, because either the budget's going to be approved or it's not. I don't think you can separate that component out unless you amend the budget.
So could my amendment be to amend
Good, continue.
to, vote for the increase separately?
Can we do that?
What was the question? This is Jeff Sultanic. I'm on.
Puts them on high. The question is, can we amend the motion? The motion that sits on the floor right now is the entire
Right.
budget, including the tax rate as presented by the administration. And the question that Ms. Brown had is, can she make a amendment motion to separate the tax increase out from the remainder of the budget?
The answer is no. The tax increase is integrally connected with the budget. So you can't separate it out, as Mr. Gilsbach said. She could make a motion saying, in lieu of a 5.3 increase, a 4.1% increase, which would affect other calculations and what's included in the budget, but you can't separate the two issues out.
Do you have a number in mind you'd like to, and we can
Chair.
help walk you through that? Yes,
I have a parliamentary
Ms.
question.
Masson, yes.
Hey, we're still in the committee of the whole meeting. Can we go through this process in the committee of the whole, or does it have to be during the main meeting? And that all we would do now is to move something forward, as we usually do.
Well, you could, if there is no amendment right now, what will be voted on is whether this committee will move on forward the budget to the board meeting, which will follow sometime hereafter.
If we can,
So the answer to your question is, the board is not bound ultimately with the committee recommendation, but one of the purposes of having the committee discussion is that you think will have a chance of passing when you bring it to the board.
So let me go back to Ms. Brown, just briefly here. If you have a number in mind, you can make a motion to say, I'd like to amend the motion, the budget, to move that 5.3% to whatever number you want that to be.
Okay,
If you don't, I don't want you to feel pressure either, but
yeah.
that's how you can word that.
I'm thinking, okay. I wasn't expecting to drop the number, but, I'm thinking, okay. I guess I'll move forward. We can move forward.
Okay, who's Mr. Miller?
I just was gonna ask my colleagues to line item, what would be cut? If you were gonna decrease the taxes, what would be cut on the expense side of things? Just a request to my colleagues, Mr. Thiel.
No,
No, a number.
no, there was not a number. No. No, there was not. Yeah, I would have, yeah, definitely recognized that. Any other discussion?
Oh, so yeah, I forgot we were in discussion. Okay, so, I understand that we need to increase taxes. I truly do. I understand that in order to move our district forward, there's some increase that needs to be made. However, within good conscience, I could not support a tax increase currently because I understand where our community lies at this point in time. Gas is $5 a gallon. Milk, the price of milk has increased. The assumption is because someone owns a property that they're not currently living, you know, in a stressful time, that they're not living check to check. And even with the Homestead program, it's still strenuous on people. So knowing all that I know from being within the community and working with the people within the community and our students, you know, specifically, I cannot support a tax increase because even teachers that live here in this community are struggling. They don't make, you know, sufficient funds. So everything is going up. Wages is not going up. And I understand that this increase will support the budget as of salary increase. So what I would say is that if this does not pass, could we not cut from teachers because their wages are already low? But again, I know the struggles of the people in the community currently. And just knowing that we have students that are literally sleeping in cars, and some have lost homes because of being homeowners. I can't support it right now. So that's my piece on it.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. Ms. Brown.
May I just comment on something? I think there was a comment about cutting from teachers. Are you suggesting that we furlough teachers? And if so, we're too late to economically furlough teachers under Pennsylvania law, under the circumstances.
That's what I was saying is, if this does not pass, right? So let's say if everyone choose not to increase taxes, it was brought to my attention that we would have to cut salaries. So my ask is, if we have to cut salaries, we do not cut the salaries of our teachers already paid with low wages.
Oh, okay. Okay, I understood. I misunderstood you. The
Yes.
answer is,
Thank you, Mr.
but we have other contractual commitments that may produce salaries.
Yes, we're going to go to Ms. Ortiz, please.
This is discussion, so.
Yes, discuss away.
I'm a single mom and I live the struggle every day. Now's not the time for a tax hike. People can't even put gas in their cars. They don't know where their next meal is coming from to feed their families. And some don't even know how they're going to make it from one day to the next. I cannot in good conscience impose a tax increase when we have a community that's already struggling. That's why tonight, I'll be voting no.
Okay, Ms. Harris?
I too will be voting no for a tax increase. I'm in the struggle. I see it. I was in it when it started, especially with COVID. It ain't changed. Rents have gone up. People have lost their homes, have lost their apartments. Landlords are tripling their rent. People can't afford it. They can't afford to eat. They can't afford to go back and forth to work, let alone daycare. It's bad. And I cannot, as a person who loves my community, understands it, in it, calls from people, even just for resources. I've had to call Natasha Brown several times for people who did not have homes because of her position that she has. And that hurts. Seeing people like that, that just hurts. So I will not be voting for the tax increase.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. We're discussing. Mrs. Conover.
I just want to make a comment. In full transparency, I know over the years that I've been on this board, even when I ran for school board, I spoke out and I spoke against raising taxes. But since then, I've got a chance to sit down and I committed to this the last year, this time, to be able to sit down with our
business manager and try to understand and try to figure out ways that we could actually get out of the hole that we're in. And so the reason why I decided to make this statement, because tonight I will be voting for a tax increase, because I understand that, just like Dr. Stanford said at the beginning of this meeting, that we're fighting amongst ourselves. My goal is to make sure that our students get what it is that they need. You know, I'm tired of housing them. You know, I know Mr. Palmer said just the other day, you know, we can't just do enough. We have to do what it is that we have to do. I know for a fact, if I had $20 in my pocket and I had to feed my kids, I'm going to feed my kids. You understand? I'm not going to start talking about it tomorrow. I'm going to deal with today. So I will be voting for this tax increase. I would like to see the community, because, you know, folks leave here, whoever's watching, you know, we talk about what we have to do, but then we put it off on somebody else and we don't do what it is we have to do. And as a result of that, we're right back here the following year talking about what we don't have, you know, and I feel for, you know, I don't like going to bed when people are homeless. So I'm not minimizing this situation, but at the same time, we cannot not educate our kids and our families, because what we're doing, it's becoming a vicious cycle. So what do you think is going to happen if we do another 4 years and our kids don't get the services and education that they need? They're going to be the ones sleeping in the cars. So we have to stop it somewhere. So for us not to vote in favor, because this is what we have to do. We went over that. We've been here for a long time. If we don't vote for it and try to figure out what the strategy is going to look like down the line, start pushing for revenues to come back into our community. Let's talk about the things that we can do instead of the things that we're not doing. You know, until we do that, we're going to have the same problem. So tonight, you know, and I know I ran on it, you know, and I'm unapologetic. You know, I want to find a solution. I want to get out of the hole. And this is my plea to the community, just as well as my colleagues. Let's do something about it instead of saying it's the way it is. You know, so that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mrs. Conover. Any other comments or discussion?
I would just
Mrs.
like,
Wilk?
yes, I would like to be on the record as well. Very similar to Mrs. Conover. I intend to vote for the tax increase today. We just approved new positions. We just approved an increase to central admin's budget. I think that it would be irresponsible of us to not vote for the tax increase that presents a balanced budget moving forward, so that we don't have to then turn around and figure out who would need to be laid off. I like everyone else, I do believe that everything that has been said on both sides of the coin, I've said this to all of my colleagues at one point or another, we all have the same common goal. We have 9 different lenses, but we all have the same common goal, and it's for the kids. And I appreciate the presentation on the Homestead prior to tonight's debate on the budget, so we could see the bigger picture on the impact that you know has on the impact that we're making by making this decision to raise taxes. So I will be voting yes.
Ms. Matheson?
I would like to echo what Mrs. Welch just said. And for me, this is a little bit difficult because my preferred budget would include far more for directly into the classroom and that entire list that I gave the other night. In a way, by supporting a budget that is, it's doing some things that are necessary administratively. Don't get me wrong about that, but I would prefer the reverse order. And so for me, it's a little bit hard to have to vote yes on this budget, but yes, we have to do it. We have got to fund this district to the maximum extent possible because our kids deserve it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other further discussion, conversation here? Mr. Palmer?
I might as well say something too. I can't stress enough the amount of work that our homeless liaisons do, what Tarsha does, what we do in the Allentown School District, and going back to just feeding our students. Many don't know breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it's hard out there. It's really hard, and I understand that there's rent is going up, gas is going up. And I can't stress enough that our anger is displaced to the school board. That stuff is going up, but there are people making profits off people's backs. We are not doing that. We are sitting in a seat unpaid, making sure that our students are getting a proper education. The only way that a financially underfunded school district can do that is to find ways to get money. Unfortunately, right now, raising taxes seems like the only thing that we can really do. I know it sounds bad, but it's $177 per person. We need to find ways to have all of these developers start helping us, because we are helping them at this point. We are living in their developments. We are buying their gas. We are buying their increased groceries. We need to start having them help our students so they can do better. Right now, we're looking to ask the people, and the people are upset. People are upset at us for this, but they should be upset at the fact that they are paying $400 more worth of rent. The fact that we do have people like LaTarsha Brown working endlessly to help our students. I hate the fact that we're even discussing raising taxes, but that's how underfunded we actually are. And I walk into a school and I see a sign that says, if not now, then when? And we're not even living by that mantra. We're just putting things off, putting things off, putting things off, and we're not getting anywhere. We're having these same discussions every year. This is my first year on the school board, but I've heard this discussion at least 4 or 5 times. What do we do? What do we do? How do we get more money? We need to start getting more money. At the end of the day, we can't let another year go by and our donations are so minimal. We can't continue to do that. We have to start working together as a board to find alternatives instead of raising taxes. Understand we need to do something now. We need to really start planning for the future for our students.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Yes, Ms. Brown.
So, majority rules, right? So this is not about me by no means. Like you said, you know, we're here, we're striving to do better for our students in the community. So again, yes, this is not about me, and everybody's entitled to their vote. So I was simply stating why I couldn't, because of the people that I work with, the people that I have to look at. I can't look them in the face and say, I understand, and then I'm increasing their rent, or excuse me, increasing their taxes. So the fact that majority rules, basically, we already know what the end result is going to be. I did my job, and I'm glad that you guys, you know, your decision is your decision. My decision is mine. Each and every one of us have our own vote. So there's no hard feelings or, you know, any type of issues. I respect each and every one of you. But at the end of the day, you know, we just have to agree to disagree sometimes. So thank you.
Ms. Brown.
No, I said the same thing on Friday. It's really hard to look someone in the face after increasing their taxes and tell them this was just needed.
Okay, so we're gonna do a roll call vote, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Conover,
Yes.
Ms. Harris,
No.
Ms. Matheson,
Yes.
Ms. Miller,
No.
Ms. Ortiz,
No.
Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Thiel,
Yes.
Ms. Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Brown.
No.
Five, four, budget carries.
So this moves on to the meeting after this meeting, the budget as presented by the administration. Are there any cards on non-agenda items?
Robert Smith.
And this is on non-agenda items. Mr. Smith, your name, address. Thank you.
Robert E. Smith Jr., 1060 East Gordon Street, Allentown, PA, also president of the East Ritter Association. I heard about the teachers being taken care of. I also have fireside chats with teachers. I happen to have friends and relatives that are teachers, and they've told me that the money they got is not quite right. So maybe we need a director of salary to take care of their salary right now, because it seems they're not getting their increases. So I'd like the board to check into that, please. A little history since 2010 was brought up, and being a 16-year board member that served 1/3 of his life in this room, Dr. Angelo was the superintendent when I came on the board. Great lady. We were in empowerment. She helped lead us out of there, and I was on that board. During that time, 2010, we started the foundation. That foundation finances teachers and students every year. And we have an outstanding program every year. And that was started in 2010. 2011, Dr. Sahorchek took over, the rock star. Remember him? 1 year he lasted. He took a federal program, took federal funds. You know what you had to do to get the federal funds? By this superintendent, Dr. Sahorchek, former Secretary of Education for Rendell. You had to fire your high school principals. So we had to take Mr. Falco and put him in the administration box over here. And then we had to get rid of Moniz. Moniz was an outstanding dear-off principal. And guess where Mr. Moniz is now? Next door in Parkland High School, doing an outstanding job. And after that, we hired Dr. Mayo. Deborah Trotter begged me to hire Dr. Mayo, begged me. She said, he is so great. The teachers love him. Didn't turn out so well, but I wasn't president, but whoever was the president at the time, and I wanted you to know the 16 years I've been on the board, it was mixed, but mostly Democrat controlled. Dr. Mayo was bought out of his contract, another superintendent, which cost this district millions of dollars because we had to pay his salary, pay an interim superintendent. The interim superintendent was Gary Cooper, not the actor, another superintendent. Gary Cooper came in, and you know what the first thing Gary Cooper did? He gave all the administrators a salary increase. The first thing he did in this poor school district. And after Gary Cooper left, after raising all the salaries, we hired Dr. Thomas Parker, another rock star. Thomas left us. Now we have Dr. Stanford.
Smith, it's 3 minutes.
I'm entitled to 5 as president of an organization, but I'll wrap it up. But that, since every other organization gets 5 minutes, how come I don't? Just clarification.
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Is there a new rule that I don't know about? Because the teacher president gets 5 minutes.
I think it's just the teacher president, to be honest, Bob.
Okay, then I will conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And anyone else? And this is Committee Finance, Committee of the Whole for Finance. Is there any old business colleagues want to bring up? Any new business? Seeing none, entertain a motion to adjourn. Move second.
Second.
Second, we got a bunch of seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, and we'll take a brief recess, Mrs. Wilt. Yes, thank you. What time? 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Ms. Matheson,
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Ms. Ortiz,
Here.
Mr. Palmer, Mr. Thiel.
Here.
Ms. Will.
Here.
9 members present.
Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance and moment of silence. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, I do not have any remarks. Dr. Stanford,
Madam President, I do not either.
do you have any public comment on agenda items?
First one, Sarah Jane Brees.
Just to clarify, is now when I'm talking, if it's a new business item that's on the agenda? I'll speak whenever.
No,
No,
just
that would
wait
be
till the end.
after,
Yeah.
after new business.
Okay, so you'll do the new business, then let me talk before you vote.
Yeah. There's a,
The Cleveland McKinley.
There are two.
under new business, but there's an opportunity to talk on non-agenda.
Not prior to a motion. Mr. Solicitor?
I'm here. Okay.
There's,
There should-
did you hear
there
the
should-
question?
Yes, there should be an option to have a member of the public speak prior to any action
Okay,
taken.
all right.
Okay, I'll wait.
Thank you.
Robert Smith.
Robert E. Smith Jr., 1060 East Gordon Street, Allentown, PA. I live on the east side of Allentown, president of the East Ritterville Association. I did say budget, but I like to also talk on the one personnel item, if I may. I'd like to thank Lisa Lesko. She's an outstanding principal and another good person we're leaving from the district. And let's talk about retainage a little bit. These are more, we have new positions in the budget, and that's great. But let's not know that the people that are leaving are outstanding people, and we're losing great talent in this district. And it's not just the people that are leaving. How about the people that are looking? And there's a lot of them. And I hear it at my fireside chats. Now we'll go to the budget. As an East Side homeowner, I'm on the street with a lot of senior citizens and a lot of hardworking family men. I hope that this pandemic doesn't ruin our lives for the next 10 years. People on my street have trouble getting medical, pharmacy drugs, $6 for gas, for diesel. The farmers are having trouble. Food, gas, medical, the water, we get hit from the city water and sewer is going up. The garbage fee, the Homestead Act doesn't do anything for that. The Homestead Act doesn't do anything for renters because the renters are gonna go up too. We may get $800 off our taxes, but the renters are gonna go up. And this is gonna hurt the city. Around us are all either 1%, 2%, and we're going up 5.3 because we can. I know we need to go up incrementally because we have a new middle school and my heart is there, and there's no reason why we can't lower 5.3 to 2%. Also, we don't even have a state budget yet. Director Miller, you made an excellent point. What is the problem about waiting till we get a state budget? We opened the budget at least 2 or 3 times when I was on the board for 16 years. I don't know why we can't do that again. Why can't you wait before raising taxes to the maximum and let's see what the state budget is? You can always reopen the budget. Please think about this, especially the people that voted yes. You can lower the tax increase. All I ask is to lower the 5.3. I know when I was on the board, I couldn't get it to 0, but we could get it to 1 or 2. So please think about it before you take that vote. The Allentown families, the Allentown seniors, and the students that you represent, actually, this will affect in indirect ways. That's what you're not getting. You say you're doing it for the kids, but you're hurting the parents that have to work 2 jobs to pay the taxes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any other comment cards? At this time, may I have a motion for the approval of the Board of Directors report?
So moved.
Ms. Ortiz, Mr. Thiel, second. Is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, please call the roll.
Ms. Harris.
Yeah.
Ms. Matheson.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Ms. Ortiz.
Yes.
Mr. Palmer. Mr. Thiel.
Yes.
Ms. Wilt.
Yes.
Ms. Brown.
Yeah.
Ms. Conover.
Yeah.
9-0 passes.
Thank you. May I have a motion for the approval of the superintendent's report?
So moved.
Mr. Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Harris, is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, please call the roll.
Ms. Ortiz.
Yes.
Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Thiel.
Yeah.
Ms. Wilt.
Yes.
Ms. Brown.
Yeah.
Ms. Conover.
Yes.
Ms. Harris.
Yeah.
Ms. Matheson.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
9-0 passes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Matheson, I'm entertaining your motion for the personnel report. May I please have a second? Ms. Harris, is there any discussion on the motion?
Yes.
Ms. Ortiz?
I just wanted to say a few words about Mrs. Lisa Lesko. I've had the pleasure of knowing her for the past few years. She's been wonderful for the Sheridan community. Her compassion and caring and love for the students, staff, and families have warmed my heart. I watched her go above and beyond every day for every child. I wish her the best of luck in her future endeavors. She will be dearly missed by the Sheridan community, especially me and Gianna.
Thank you very much. Is there any other discussion? Well, I would just like to say what I always say, which is every time I read the personnel report, I see at least a handful of names that my family has had direct interaction with. And I know that they are just some of the very many staff that help our kids be the best that they can be. And I just want to wish those that are moving on well, and those that are joining us, welcome. And those that are changing positions, thank you. So if there's no further discussion, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
Mr. Thiel.
Yes.
Ms. Wilt.
Yes.
Ms. Brown.
Yes.
Ms. Conover.
Yes.
Ms. Harris.
Yeah.
Ms. Matheson.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Ms. Ortiz.
Yes.
9-0 passes.
Thank you. I'd like to pause at this time so that Dr. Stanford, you and the administration can recognize some new hires.
Thank you, Mrs. Wilt. Tonight, the board approved 2 administrative positions. One is Mr. Shada, who will be replacing Miss Lesko at Sheridan Elementary. We're extremely excited about Mr. Shada's entry. He was a former student of Sheridan Elementary and a teacher. So welcoming him back there is extremely exciting. You also approved Mr. Kyle Kaufman. He will be joining ASD as the director of STEM. He has an extensive background in science, technology, engineering, and math, and he currently works as a senior educator at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, where he's become a master in curriculum and professional development. So we're excited to welcome them both.
Thank you, Ms. Ramos. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for the finance report, which again is the business that we just conducted, that's the word I'm trying to say, in the finance committee meeting immediately preceding this meeting. We have a motion for the finance report. Mr. Thiel, is there a second? Ms. Matheson, is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Thiel.
Yes.
Ms. Wilt.
Yes.
Ms. Brown.
Sorry, no.
Ms. Conover.
Yes.
Ms. Harris.
Yes.
Ms. Matheson.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
No.
Ms. Ortiz.
No.
Mr. Palmer.
Yes.
6-3 passes.
At this time, we'll take comments on non-agenda items.
Sarah Jane Brace again.
Yep.
Yep.
You may, yes, that I'm sorry. I had a parliamentary brain hiccup, so.
Sarah Brace, 227 North 9th Street, Allentown. Good evening. I'm here to speak about the resolution for the sale of the Cleveland and McKinley property. You're going to hear more information about it soon. I learned that what you're getting is just an authorization to prepare the documents, and then you'll vote on the resolution with terms and conditions. So in the meantime, I just want to give you some thoughts to ponder about those properties. Have you thought about deed restricting the property to make sure a charter school cannot put a school there? Both properties are in densely populated neighborhoods where families love the neighborhood aspect of the former schools. A charter school placed there would be the nail in the coffin for the district. Families will absolutely transfer their children out of the district to have them attend a school closer to home. And what would stop one buyer from saying they're going to do XYZ with the property and 2 years later turn around and sell it to a charter school? The deed restriction at least keeps boundaries on what can be done with the property for a specified length of time. Why has the district not committed to using one of the spaces for a community center? Again, our most densely populated neighborhoods have no recreation, and when those buildings are sold, their small playgrounds will be gone. Sure, they can walk a few blocks to Hayes, but that playground is locked up after hours, so that's a space that they can't use. Committing to a community center space on one of the properties would give our students a better chance at staying safe and off the streets after school hours. I'm hoping more information is discussed and the board thinks long and hard about what the sale means for the future of the district and our kids. We absolutely need to unload the properties because they're costing the district money, but it needs to be done to protect the district's bottom line way into the future and to benefit our students and families. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Brace. I have, Mr. Solicitor. I don't know if this is, may I have a sidebar? Is that appropriate?
Yes.
Okay. some clarity for our solicitor, for one of my board members, one of my colleagues, I should say. So no more public comment. Okay, that brings us to old business. Is there any old business to come before the board? Is there any new business to come before the board?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion for reconsideration for the finance vote, for the taxes, for myself.
And you give you need
And the
to,
reason why, I think I had a menopausal moment because I said I was gonna vote no and ended up voting yes. And, I want to be on the record. I know y'all. It's all right. It's okay. What myself. So I'd like to, be able to, have the vote over, please.
so you're,
She can just change her vote.
I, that's what my sidebar was at. We're following the parliamentary recommendations of our solicitor.
Mhm.
So you're offering an amendment
Yes.
for reconsideration of the finance report. So there's a motion out there. Is there a second? Mr. Palmer. Is there any discussion from the board? Okay, prior to us calling roll, is there any public comment? Mr. Thiel?
If this passes, could we break out those items in the finance report?
Sure.
Thank you.
What was your question?
If this motion passes, he's asking that we vote individually on the items that are in the finance report. So, if my colleagues are all right with,
This is the one about the taxes, correct? Tax
well,
increase.
the budget was in the finance report. So if your motion passes, then we will reconsider the finance report, but rather than voting on it as a whole, I'll bring up each individual agenda item. So no further discussion? Please call the roll on the motion to reconsider the finance report individually.
Ms. Conover,
No.
Ms. Harris,
To reconsider it individually.
Right, we're voting whether or not we accept your motion to reconsider it. So we're not voting on the budget
Okay,
or the finance
reconsider it,
report,
yes.
just your request.
Ms. Matheson,
No.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Ortiz,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Are we combining what Mr. Thiel said and what Ms. Harris said?
No, we're just, right now, we're voting on the motion that has been
Pull out
put
the
on
vote again.
the table to reconsider the finance report. If the yays have it, then we will reconsider the finance report. But we'll talk about the budget and Homestead and the stipulation of council individually.
Well, it was 6-3 last time, right? Just making sure. Okay, yeah,
Mr. Thiel,
no,
Ms. Wilt,
No,
Ms. Brown,
Yes.
5-4.
okay.
The yeas have it.
So the motion passes. So we will, Mr. Solicitor, at this time would be the time that we would do that prior to going on to any further new business, correct?
Yes, since they've motioned, yes.
Okay. At this time, I will entertain a motion for agenda item 2 on the finance report, the final budget for fiscal year 2022-2023. Mr. Palmer, is there a second? Mr. Thiel. Is there any discussion?
What are we looking at? What did you say we looking at?
Budget.
Oh.
It's Exhibit A, the final budget as per Exhibit A.
Okay. Exhibit A or exhibit B?
It's an A.
It's an A.
Hold on a second. I think there may be an issue with breaking out the separate items between the Homestead Act
Okay.
issue and the budget.
So we're,
Because they're intertwined together. So
okay,
it'd be impossible to vote. It would create a significant problem if you approve one and not the other. They have to they work together.
so
they have
we would approve the budget and the homestead together and the stipulation separately.
I believe that can be done.
Okay,
yes.
all right. My
Great.
apologies.
Didn't we
Uh-oh.
discuss this? Oh, most of them already.
Whoever made the motion and whoever made the second should agree to that modification.
Mr. Palmer, are you good with that? Okay. So the motion on the table right now that we're, or the portion we're, for, or again, or for voting is the budget and the homestead combined. Everybody good? All right.
But we just voting on the budget again.
With the exhibit C, and then we'll vote separately on the stipulation of council.
Okay.
Please call the roll on the budget and homestead.
Ms. Harris,
No.
Matheson,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
No.
Ms. Ortiz,
No.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Thiel,
Yes.
Ms. Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Brown,
No.
Ms. Conover.
Yes.
5-4 passes.
Thank you. We'll entertain a motion for the approved.
Mr. Thiel.
Mr. Thiel is, and Mr. Palmer made a motion and a second for the approval of stipulation of council. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Matheson,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Ortiz,
Yes.
Mr. Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Thiel,
Yes.
Ms. Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Conover,
Yeah.
Ms. Harris.
Yeah.
9-0 passes.
Is there any other new business to come before the board?
Madam President, I'd like to make a motion to authorize the sale of Cleveland Elementary School with the address of 424 North 9th Street in the city of Allentown, Lehigh County, Pennsylvania, by sealed bid requested by the Board of Directors pursuant of the applicant school code, as well as motion to authorize the sale of McKinley Elementary School with the address of 1124 West Turner in the city of Allentown by sealed bid requested by the Board of School Directors pursuant of the applicant's school code.
I second the motion.
So there's a motion on the table by Mr. Miller, seconded by Ms. Harris. Do you have the motion? Everybody, we've all seen the motions. So is there any discussion?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. Sorry, go ahead.
Can you, because I don't remember having a conversation. Can we talk about the options that we had? What are the differences we had? Still bid, what were the options?
Oh, let the administration.
We'll let the administration present that.
Yeah. I know we were supposed to have this conversation, but we never did. And this is it. After today, this is it.
No, I'll make a correction to that. So just a kind of point of order. So we'll approve this and I'm going to make an amendment to the motion actually that will include that there's still bid documents that the board will have to approve that ratification. And that bid document will set the terms of what the board is looking for in terms of the sale, whether it's
So when we had the conversation, it was my understanding that we were gonna make sure that every board member had an understanding of what those those options were, how that was supposed to be done. And have discussion. So we can have discussion now if we want to have it, but we never did. If somebody's gonna say, well, the email sent, I just want to make sure everybody has an understanding and is agreeing on it. Just bring it to the floor and voting on it. I don't know that I'm in agreement with that, but I'm only 1 of 9.
so let's have the discussion so that we keep this moving forward.
So if someone could explain to us, maybe the solicitor, what our options are in terms of still bid versus what?
Yeah, there would be a couple of options. that one is the most common option used would be the sealed.
They can hear you through your mic.
Oh. Is that better? Can you hear me, Jeff?
I can hear you. The most common option is a private sale of real estate with court approval, but sealed bid is often used by school districts to enhance competition and to review bids from unknown individuals who may want to come up and purchase the property. A private sale of real estate usually involves a situation where a district hires a real estate person and markets the property on that basis. I was not directly involved. My partner, David Comer, was directly involved in reviewing all of the options under the school code, but the two primary options are sealed bid, public auction, or private sale of real estate.
And Jeff, on my understanding from talking with Dave is that components outside of the bid process, though, do require court approval. Is that?
That is correct.
So just
I can send you the memo.
Attorney Sultanic, just so we're all clear, the sealed bid process allows the board to make these stipulations in the bid document saying that they have the final approval and can reject any bid.
That is correct.
And they don't have to necessarily take the highest and best. They can evaluate individual bids and reject and accept at the vote of the board.
That's correct, depending upon how the documentation is worded.
Okay, so my amendment would be to include that language so that the board has the opportunity to the financial impact and the community impact and the fiscal feasibility of any project that's proposed, that they have the correct finances to actually pull that project off. So I'll make that amendment to what those motions as I stated it, so I don't have to repeat it if my colleagues are on board with that.
Don't you have a prepared resolution to that effect for today's action?
It doesn't include the board having the final say and being able to reject any and all bids. It's just a motion to move forward with the seal bid, but not with the stipulation of the bid document wording.
Does that also include the ability to the parameters for what they can do with the property as well? I want to make sure that's in there as well.
Right, so deed restricting, I personally support deed restricting from charter schools. What we're doing.
I don't think you put in this motion. That has to be a separate action of the board.
Okay, so at a later date when we approve the ratification of the bid documents?
You could do it at that point if that's the direction you want to take.
So I would make that ask of the administration.
Right now, I'm not quite sure if you need to put in all these stipulations, because ultimately, if you're going to review the bid documents and take action down the road to do that, that's when you can go over the stipulations that you want to have in place.
I would push back on that just because the board has had conflicting interests on how we want to move forward with the sealed bid process. So I think it would make my colleagues more comfortable to have those stipulations now that the board has the final say to vote up or down any bid before moving forward with that.
I would rather we start off on the right foot as well, just making sure everything's in place so we don't have to have this conversation later.
Ms. Matheson, did you?
No, I'm okay. After that, I'm okay.
Any other discussion?
So just so we're sure, so I'm making that motion per as I stated before to amend the posted motion.
Can you?
So you want to amend the posted motion not to necessarily award the bid to the highest responsible bid?
And that the board has the final say and.
Right.
I'm just reviewing what you reviewed with Mr. Comer today.
Right.
Okay, so long as the bid documents contain some objective standards of selection on a sealed bid process, I believe we can do it, but we can't just have discretion on a sealed bid to pick whoever we want, because that's the purpose of getting court approval. And I believe that that's what Mr. Comer was sharing with you, but we need to have an objective set of criteria under the circumstances.
So can the board direct the administration to come up with those and put in the ratification of the bid documents?
You can direct the administration to work with counsel to develop a set of objective criteria that would enable the district to not necessarily award the bid to the highest offerer. Because, for example, one of the factors could be that you want to take into account whether the property is going to be an exempt use or a non-exempt use, because a non-exempt use would generate long-term real estate income for the district. As an example, that would be an objective criteria. So if you have an exempt use coming in to use the property versus that may offer more money versus a non-exempt use, the non-exempt use could theoretically derive more dollar income to the district.
Do we set different parameters for both buildings, or they both have to be the same?
You could theoretically set different parameters for both buildings, but I think that becomes complicated at this point.
Mr. Solicitor, question, could one, as we move forward with this process, could one of the parameters technically be one that would encompass meeting the economic needs of the community?
Well, that it needs to be more precise than that, because that's a highly speculative characterization. Now, if you're going to say specifically that it needs to be a facility that will help youth in after-school programs and provide these kinds of supports, is much more specific than just saying that something will help the community. Once again, the purpose of the sealed bid process is to avoid a court approval of the subject, but you need to have criteria ensuring to the public that you're offering it and getting the most amount of money under the circumstances for the community, because that's who you're the fiduciary for.
So we can make a general amendment that the administration work with counsel on
Yes,
this.
you could just say that the motion will direct the administration to work with the solicitor's office to develop a set of criteria that will pass muster for a sealed bid that will give the school board some discretion within the boundaries of the requirements of a sealed bid.
So
just make a motion to that effect and then we can.
Yeah, I'll make an amendment to that effect. Do I have a second?
To repeat it. Okay.
So there's a motion that has been amended motion to that effect. That has been on the, offered by Mr. Miller. It's been seconded by Ms. Matheson. There any discussion? No further seeing and hearing none.
Ms. Harris,
Yes.
Ms. Matheson,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Ms. Ortiz,
Yes.
Palmer,
Yes.
Mr. Thiel,
Yes.
Ms. Wilt,
Yes.
Ms. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Conover.
Yes.
9-0 passes.
Okay. Is there any further new business to come before the board? Seeing and hearing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn. All righty. I'm sorry.